I think it's pretty well established that I love the Silent Hill series, and if not, well, consider this my official declaration. This franchise houses some of the absolute best games ever made, both in and out of their respective genres. It's a series I genuinely care about, and if you're watching this, I'm sure it's a similar situation for you. But even the hyper-obsessed SH fan runs into a bit of a problem. With all of the numerous entries in the franchise and the compoundingly numerous ports and re-releases for each of those titles, which one offers the best, most accurate, most complete experience? It's a question I still get a lot, whether it's in my chat during a live stream, my comment section, a DM, or a mention on Twitter. It seems like people are eager to play these games, but they want to know exactly where they should direct their attention, and in some cases, where they shouldn't. Now you guys know this is exactly the kind of stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning, but even I have to admit I haven't personally laid hands on every single option as far as this series goes. And even if I did at one point, with hardware emulation and backwards compatibility being more viable now, there's a lot of new contenders that need to be evaluated. So what do you say you and I take a little trip down to America's foggiest, most depressing tourist attraction in an attempt to figure out the best way to play every single Silent Hill game? Before we cross that threshold though, there are a few rules we're going to have to follow. First off, with only one exception, we aren't going to cover titles that were only ever released on a single platform. That means stuff like the Silent Hill play novel, Book of Lost Memories, the mobile phone releases, the arcade shooter, and PT aren't going to be showing up here. If those are titles you're interested in hearing about, I do have a nearly 7-hour video covering most of the stuff I just mentioned, so go check that out. Oh, and I no longer have an Xbox 360 because finding one that'll play NTSC games here in Tokyo, while not impossible, is a little rough, so you're gonna have to settle for backwards compatibility on the Xbox Series X. And lastly, while I do have my own personal preferences, I'm not going to be giving out a list of quote-unquote objective best ports for everything we talk about. Instead, I'll try to lay out the pros and cons so that you can decide what the best option might be for your situation. And with that huge preamble out of the way, what do you guys say we kick this thing off proper? What's up guys, I'm Jared, and this is Avalanche Reviews.
Cheryl? Is that Cheryl?
You guys remember how I said no SH games that were released on a single platform? Well, listen, hear me out. While Silent Hill 1 has technically never experienced life outside of a PS1 CD, there are a few cool ways a potential player could access the contents of that same PS1 disc. But before we get into exactly what those methods are, we've got to talk about not only how important this game is, but how much it used both the strengths and weaknesses of the original PlayStation to its advantage.
This is not a dream. What's happening to this place?
Just as a bit of a history lesson, Silent Hill started its life as an answer to Capcom's Resident Evil, a fact that I thought was pretty common knowledge, but judging by the sheer flood of insulted comments I got when I included it in my list of RE clones, apparently I was very wrong. So if this is indeed news to you, Konami put Team Silent together with the literal stated goal of cloning Resident Evil. Now, of course, the end result would change a lot of the core tenets of RE's newly named survival horror genre, which is why creator Keiichiro Toyama describes the game as a psychological horror, a nice little spin-off genre that borrows survival horror's backtracking, exploration, puzzle solving, and progression, but tweaks elements like the combat, perspective, limited resources, and inventory management. The combination of these new and old features come together to form something that Resident Evil fans will immediately be familiar with mechanically, but can still be surprised by. Silent Hill's first offering was a lot more successful than Konami had expected for the project, which does make sense. After all, they formed Team Silent by recruiting the company's misfits, developers who didn't work well with others or had issues following directions that didn't align with what they wanted. And if you ask me, one of the bigger reasons for SH1's impact comes in the form of its presentation. These guys knew they weren't working with an unlimited power source platform-wise, so instead of compromising their vision, they decided to use a few shortcomings in order to strengthen it. For example, their free-moving, non-fixed perspective allowed players to see a lot of the environment they were exploring, which is something that doesn't exactly jive well with the level of detail they were looking to put in said environment. So they decided Silent Hill was going to be a town blanketed in a combination of darkness, fog, and snow, letting the game world explain why visibility wasn't anywhere near 100%. On a more technical note, they also used dithering to limit the amount of color information they would need to squeeze through the PS1's processor, and if that's a new term for you, I can guarantee you've seen it before. Dithering is a method used to display a color, shadow, or transparency layer on every other pixel to half the amount of work a console would have to do in order to display that effect. This was something really common on Sega consoles, and if you ask me, the Saturn is where it reigns king. Essentially, the goal here was to play on two similar factors. First off, CRT or tube TVs of the day weren't exactly what you could call pixel accurate. They were famous for shifting, stretching, and blurring the images they displayed, which sort of became their signature look. Also, the human eye is pretty damn good at filling in blanks and will often perform this task while the viewer isn't even aware it's going on. These two elements combined together allow developers looking to pull off some sort of an effect to render every other pixel in a line, and to us, the resulting image would appear to show that effect smoothly being pulled off. Using dithering, Team Silent pulled off some amazing looking faux transparencies, and as you can imagine, the resource saving aspect of that comes in real handy when your game world is like 75% transparent fog. If you're looking to find out more about the PS1's specific brand of dithering, I would highly recommend Displaced Gamer's video on the matter. I'll link it down in the description. Trust me, it is a crazy interesting watch. Well, anyways, as you can see, Silent Hill 1 and dithering may as well be a married couple. Nearly every single inch of SH is dithered, and it's an effect that can be a little hard on the eyes if you're not used to seeing it. I will admit that I love seeing dithering, but at the end of the day, it's a preference thing. And if you stick around for a few minutes, we'll talk about how you might not have to deal with it if you don't want to. But we can't spend all day talking about Silent Hill 1's jaw-dropping real-time graphics because it also has some killer-looking pre-rendered cutscenes to offer. These bad boys were the sole results of Takayoshi Sato's hard work, and as you can see, the man certainly knew what he was doing, especially for someone who essentially had to beg for that job on his hands and knees. Then of course you've got to consider the incredibly memorable soundtrack provided by Akira Yamaoka. This project would rocket him into the limelight, and thank God it did, because I think we can all agree this series would be, well, it wouldn't quite be right without him. All around, Silent Hill was a marvel, and if by some weird luck you're watching this but have never taken the plunge into this first game, allow me to politely request that you get off of your ass and fix that immediately. But the question remains, how exactly should you go about doing that? And I guess it's a good thing you just so happen to have tuned into this Absolute Dorks YouTube channel. Let's get into it.
I don't remember this being here before.
Like I said before, Silent Hill 1 was only ever officially released on the original PlayStation, and the good news is, it looks incredible on the console. What you're seeing here is the result of the PS Digital mod, a cute little board that intercepts the PS1's internal video signal before it's converted to analog and shot out the AV connector. That means I'm getting a pure digital signal from my PS1 via HDMI, resulting in the absolute most clean video and audio you can possibly get on real hardware. It's still the same exact image as far as performance and content goes, we're just skipping the part where it gets compressed and mangled so that an old analog display can see it. For those of you wondering, you absolutely can get a similar image by connecting the PS1 to a scaler like the RetroTink 5X, FrameMeister, or OSSC using high-quality video cables, so don't go thinking you need to learn how to solder just to play an old PS1 game. Now, I think we can all agree this is one hell of a sharp, clear, good-looking image, but one of the downsides with upscaling old game consoles is that flaws and shortcomings tend to get blown up along with the good stuff. So the dithering I mentioned earlier is way more visible here than it would be using a crappy composite cable on a CRT, and you'll be seeing stuff like compression artifacts during the CG cutscenes. Now, whether or not that's a trade-off you're willing to make is up to you, but regardless of how you view the game, its performance is, well, it's not what I would call impressive. The frame rate here can wildly fluctuate from its 60 FPS ceiling to the low 20s in some scenarios. Now, don't get me wrong, I like that they aimed for 60, but because the frame rate can drop so far, you can really feel those dips. I don't know, maybe a more consistent 30 might have been a better move. On top of the frame drops, you'll also see a whole lot of screen tearing, which is really crazy for me because when I think of the 32-bit era, I don't necessarily think screen tearing. Now, it's very important to say that this game is more than its performance, and while I have just listed a bunch of downsides, this is still an absolute classic, and I have no problem saying it still holds up today. Silent Hill 1 was a technical benchmark for the PlayStation, and with that in mind, I'd say giving the game a look on the original hardware it was designed for is a must. I truly can't imagine too many people throwing this disc into their consoles and not being impressed with what Team Silent was able to accomplish on such limited hardware. That being said, not everyone's going to have access to an original PlayStation, and even the ones that do may not have the kind of tech needed to get that console looking its best on modern displays, which I'm excited to say is where our next contender comes in.
Where is everybody?
I'd tell you if I knew, believe me.
It seems like not a lot of people know this, but unlike PS2 backwards compatibility, literally every single PS3 out there will play any PS1 game you throw at it. I mean, you guys know I'm all about testing the latest and greatest in external video scalers, but it is really hard to deny an upscaling option that a lot of people may already have sitting in their rooms. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, it is a noticeably softer image than you could get from a modern scaler, but a solution that lets you play PS1 games in a surprisingly accurate environment and in 1080p that's also free, I mean, you can't beat it. You can use the PS3's hard drive storage for a theoretically unlimited amount of memory card saves, which is pretty damn cool, and it offers just about the same exact behavior a real PS1 would, which is great for those of you wanting to make sure you experience this game exactly how you remember it. And it may sound kinda small, but you really can't discount being able to use a wireless controller without buying newer Bluetooth or 2.5 GHz adapters for your retro consoles. Really, the more I think about it, using your PS3 as a PS1 replacement starts to make a whole lot of sense value-wise for people occupying that space just below enthusiast but just above casual. Like I said, it's definitely a little softer than I'd normally like, but I couldn't in good conscience say it looks bad. And those of you who don't like the look of sharply upscaled PS1 3D graphics might actually enjoy the softer picture here. Honestly, the PS3 is kind of an unsung hero as far as getting people back into the games from their past goes. It's a great solution for playing any title released on Sony's first foray into gaming hardware, but I suspect there are a few of you watching looking for a little more. Something a little more interesting, maybe a little more different, and a lot more accurate, perhaps. Without fail, anytime upscaling gear gets mentioned on YouTube, people will come out of the woodwork to suggest using emulation instead. And without a doubt, emulation is amazing. If it wasn't for ZSNES, I would have never experienced classics like Chrono Trigger or the fan translations of Tales of Phantasia or Front Mission. And the situation's only gotten better since I started messing around with emulators in high school. I mean, flat out, emulation is a great option in most scenarios for a lot of people, but there are some of us who look for accuracy on top of accessibility. We want games to play, look, and feel exactly like they did when we first laid hands on them, and in that realm, software emulation can often lag behind. However, hardware emulation, that's a different story. My first run-in with FPGA-based hardware emulation was Analog's killer Super NT, but since I've started tinkering with the Mister, an open-source answer to the question, can we recreate the original console experience down to the electronic signals running through the silicon without that console being present? And admittedly, it would take me much longer than this entire video's runtime to explain FPGAs or field programmable gate arrays to you, but the quick and dirty is that it is a single board computer that can be programmed to mimic every single process performed by an old console down to the very last circuit. Here, let's think of it this way. With traditional software emulation, the goal is to reproduce the end result of putting a cartridge into your SNES, the image that shows up on screen. But with an FPGA-based hardware emulation solution, it's possible to recreate the entire process that resulted in that image in a cycle-accurate way. And essentially, that all breaks down to one single thing. If it happens on your console at home, it can reliably happen on your Mister. Now, I know you probably have a few more questions, and I'd love to tell you more, but I'd basically just be repeating the killer information found in My Life in Gaming's video covering the Mister, so check that out if this is something you're interested in. I use my Mister primarily to play consoles that have become far too expensive to own, RGB mod, or collect for, so stuff like the PC Engine and Sega CD. But a while back, this thing got a PS1 core, and you might be wondering what the hell I would want with cycle-accurate PS1 hardware emulation, given I already have a PS1 that outputs great-looking digital video anyways. Well, the Mister's PS1 core can do a lot of stuff a normal PS1 could never do. Remember how I mentioned SH1's crazy use of dithering? Well, here on the Mister, they've implemented an option to disable dithering, something that's pretty damn cool to see happening in real time. Now, of course, with the dithering gone, you're going to be left with the hard lines that were always there, just on every other pixel, so color gradients will now show an odd rainbow effect where these colors overlap, and really that would be enough to scare me off. If they hadn't have also figured out a way to show 24-bit color depth, which effectively achieves the look that they were using dithering to fake anyways. And in my opinion, this option alone is well worth PS1 fans checking this project out. I played through Midwich Elementary with this mode on, and it was really damn cool to see. But if you need a little more of a push in the right direction, you can also mess with the way the video looks with cool CRT filters, a true widescreen mode that actually expands the viewable screen real estate, and all kinds of other tweaks. Like I said before, this is all happening in a nearly 100% accurate environment too, so you can rest assured this is the exact same experience you'd get on a real PS1 if it were able to output 1440p and add on real-time video filters with no lag. Now keep in mind that can be a blade that cuts both ways because you'll also be able to see the same flaws show up here. Screen tearing and slowdown will all happen in the same places it did on a real PS1, and I can't really confirm this, but it seems like the 24-bit color mode and de-dithering may actually perform worse than real hardware does. There might be a chance I recorded these two clips in a way that messed with my software or the dithering threw it off, but it does seem like the Mister is slower here. Although I did notice that frame times are a lot better on the Mister, so I don't expect anyone's going to be able to tell a real difference without playing the two side by side, and even then they're going to need to have a very careful eye. Honestly, the Mister is a great little piece of hardware, and updates to the PS1 core are coming in all the time, inching it closer to that coveted 100% hardware accurate goal. It is a little on the expensive side, but when you consider how much it would cost to buy all of the consoles it can emulate and flashcards or ODEs for them, it makes a lot more financial sense. Either way though, it serves as a great way to play Silent Hill 1 for the first time or to refamiliarize yourself with it.
And don't go blasting me by mistake.
Alright, so given the three options in front of us, which is going to be best for you? Well, if you're looking for that original experience, nothing is going to beat its OG release on PS1. Those of you with a spare CRT and some composite cables just laying around will be able to jump right into the Silent Hill series in the same exact way you likely first witnessed it, or the way you would have had you have played it when it released. And if it's been a while since you've seen exactly what Sony's little gray wonder is capable of, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by just how much it accomplishes with such comparatively wimpy hardware. That being said, it's a little unrealistic to expect everyone watching this to have a PS1 and either a CRT or some kind of upscaler just hanging out. I mean, modern TVs aren't even coming with analog video connectors anymore, and the ones that do aren't going to do a good job of displaying the PS1's 240p video output. That being said, a PS3 is a great way to dive into your PS1 library. It's still emulation, but it is very good emulation, and I imagine most people watching aren't going to mind that fact very much at all. The high-definition digital video output is a little softer than I would typically prefer, but it still looks really impressive, and I bet seeing something like this would make for a nice gateway drug into the addiction that is retro video scaling. And lastly, despite the Mister being an incredible little piece of kit, I can't really say it'll serve most of your purposes. I mean, when you factor in how many other consoles and games you have available with it, the Mister does make a solid value argument, but for the purposes of this video, I have trouble suggesting you guys go out and spend around $400 just to play Silent Hill. That being said, if this project is something you've been interested in anyways, I'd say you might as well take the plunge now. I love my Mister to death, and the fact that it is about as close to hardware accurate as something can be really sweetens the deal. Well, that's one entry down, and we have how many more to go? Genuinely, I'm not joking. I might have bitten off more than I can chew with this one.
Cheryl!
So what'd you do? Robbery? Murder?
Nah, nothing like that.
Huh, you're just a gutless fatso.
There's not a whole lot of ways around it. Fact of the matter is, Silent Hill 2 is something special. This game rocked the industry when it first hit, and even now it's seen as one of the more important games ever released. Not only was it a nearly inconceivable jump forward in graphics tech compared to its predecessor, but its story moved away from the supernatural themes of that first title in favor of a focus on real-world mental illness that, unfortunately, its fan base might be all too familiar with. Instead of using these themes as some kind of cheap gameplay mechanic like any other developer may have done in this situation, Team Silent showed respect for the subject matter, and as a result we got something that would leave an everlasting mark on this industry. I mean, hell, you could ask anyone familiar with this series what their favorite Silent Hill game is, and there is a very solid chance they're gonna say Part 2, and while that may not be the case for me, I would struggle to argue with them on that. SH2 was an absolute gut punch of a story and overall one of the most satisfying horror games a person could play, but more than that, it was a perfect follow-up to the first SH title, at least as far as gameplay goes. Exploration, puzzle solving, combat, backtracking, it all seemed to be lifted straight from the PlayStation 1, and as a fan of this genre, there is nothing I enjoy more than when a developer understands how to incrementally improve on a formula as opposed to introducing far too many new features into a single entry, aka the copyrighted Capcom playbook in creating sequels nowadays. But enough with the introductions. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with Silent Hill 2 at this point, so the real question is, how did it fare in its original PS2 release?
I'll wait here. I hate bowling.
I didn't come here to play, you know.
Silent Hill 2 crashed onto the PS2 like a Mack truck, and for a very long time would serve as the best example of what the new console's silicon was capable of. It took the 3D environments that Part 1 offered and made them look closer to real life than anyone could have expected, and improved on the elements that made the first game so damn worthy of drooling over on the PS1. Lighting, shadows, and textures, they all saw a massive jump up in presentation that far exceeded what could be expected when going from one console generation to the next. And you could most certainly argue that the music saw a similar evolution forward in quality. Akira Yamaoka was already an amazing musician, but his talent was really able to shine through with this game's more melodic, soothing, and somber soundtrack. But besides the music itself, he crafted an amazing audioscape for players to experience. His masterful sound design made everything from creepy footsteps following you in a forest to an empty room seem to have impact, and without a doubt this was a much better showing than his work with the first game. A statement that is really saying something considering how damn good SH1 sounded. Before this game even hit the market though, what really had potential PS2 owners drooling were the jaw-dropping CG cutscenes. Takayoshi Sato may have done great work on SH1, but his model work and animations were just on another level here. I mean, without a doubt, these things still look incredible today, but I would say outside of their obvious great looks, what really helped them stand out at the time was the fact that they were being displayed at 60 fields per second, the interlaced version of 60 FPS. This buttery playback allows for some incredibly convincing animations, and in some instances I would say this smooth look actually adds to the not quite right sort of feeling the entire game exudes. And with how damn good this game looks, it is doubly surprising to see that it actually performs better than its predecessor. Now it does half SH1's frame rate of 60 FPS, but it experiences far fewer dips as well. If you're looking at the screen right now, you might be wondering what the hell I'm on about because it clearly says 60 FPS, but I think something about the deinterlacing that the RetroTink 5X does or something along the chain has caused my software to sort of mess up a little bit. I assure you, it's 30 FPS. Just take the number you see on screen and cut it in half. And thanks to that 30 FPS ceiling, those dips are a little harder to notice, although you will still feel them from time to time. And let me go ahead and warn you ahead of time, this next thing isn't technically a downside, but more like a curiosity I just had to include. For some reason, by default, Silent Hill 2 is offset vertically to a very noticeable degree. Now the good news is you can technically account for this in the options screen, but after messing around with that setting, I found out that it's just the gameplay that's offset. The cutscenes and still images display just fine, and that makes for a bit of a problem. Here, see how things look perfect while James is walking around after I made a few adjustments? Well, wait till I try and grab the map. You see how far up it is? That's what I'm talking about. Instead of using the game's video options, I ended up quote-unquote fixing this issue with the RetroTink's ability to move the image around a bit, but it's still not perfect. As you can see, pre-rendered screens and CG cutscenes still have a lot more letterboxing on the bottom than the top, but I got it the best I could. Now you might be wondering why in the hell you've never seen this before, and that's because back in the day, Team Silent could account for most CRTs stretching and distorting the image enough that you'd never see this stuff, which is another one of those warts and all type of trade-offs you get when deciding to start upscaling retro video. And since we're talking subjective downsides, I've never really liked static video filters in video games, but I've got to say SH2's is particularly bad looking in my opinion. On the plus side, it can be turned off, but it's hidden in a quote-unquote secret menu, so most people probably won't know about it their first time around. If you're anything like me, just head to the options screen and hit L or R1 and you'll be set. Continuing on, Team Silent went with a similar camera to the first game, and that means some of you guys may get a little seasick if you're planning on adjusting your view a lot. And to be totally honest, if we're taking off our rose-tinted glasses, this is a bit of a downside. I mean, look at how weird this looks. But to give Team Silent a little bit of credit, I don't think there were too many other options given how these guys wanted their camera system to work. Essentially, they wanted full control over what you could see at any time, like the static cameras seen in Resident Evil, but they also wanted you to be able to wrestle that control away if you wanted to. And this approach does result in some amazing looking camera angles. Camera angles that might not necessarily be great in terms of seeing enemies that could be creeping up on you though. So by hitting L2, you can swing the camera behind James's back and see what he sees, but that process is kind of slow and, I guess, wavy for lack of a better word, and that's to prevent the kind of disorientation that can come from viewing the game world from a certain perspective and then violently having that perspective altered really fast. Personally, I'm sort of used to how Silent Hill style camera controls work, and they don't really bother me at all, but if you're prone to motion sickness, I imagine this might be a bit of a problem. That aside though, this is one hell of a PS2 game. I mean, you really couldn't ask for a better follow-up to the classic that was Silent Hill 1 in terms of the visual and auditory experience. But there was a bit of an issue with the way this game was made. Not exactly one that would affect PS2 owners, but one that would make porting the game a little more rough than you might think.
I don't look like a ghost, do I?
There's no doubt that Konami was left with their pants around their ankles after the success of Silent Hill 1, and they weren't about to let that happen again, so just about 2 or 3 months after Silent Hill 2's PS2 release, they had an Xbox port ready to go. And that's really good news for all of us, because not only is the Xbox a more powerful system, but this would also open up Silent Hill's reach to an audience that may not have had access to it previously. The only problem was that SH2 was built in a way that took specific advantage of the PS2's very unique architecture, so while the Xbox was the better console under the hood, there were a lot of effects and processes that just flat out couldn't be accomplished on Microsoft's Green Monster. And the result would be a porting process that spent most of its time approximating very specific PS2 hardware tricks. For example, the PS2's fill rate allowed Team Silent to fill the screen with overlapping transparencies in the form of Silent Hill's fog, but on the Xbox this effect had to be scaled back to keep the game from slowing to a crawl. On the plus side, this version of SH2 would be the first to support native 480p video output, which is awesome, but that caused another problem. Like I said before, Silent Hill 2's CG cutscenes were displayed at 60 interlaced fields per second, and if you know how interlacing works, you know that's not exactly the same thing as 60 frames per second. So instead of de-interlacing the original video files, they just ditched half of the interlaced fields, leading to a 30 FPS frame rate. Now, obviously this isn't the worst thing in the world, but these cutscenes were pretty damn integral to the game's overall look and feel. And the team responsible for this port must have known that, which is why they used interpolated frames in order to avoid a more choppy look. And if you're scratching your head over what that means, basically in between every frame they inserted a composite of the previous and next frame combined together. Now, this definitely got the job done and helps maintain a smooth frame rate, but it also results in a very blurry, sort of smeary look. Every CG cutscene in the game suffers from this problem, and it is a little disappointing, but there are definitely going to be those of you out there who'd be willing to take that hit for the benefits gained with progressive scan output, and the good news is, it does make for a big difference in sharpness and clarity. For my PS2 capture, I was using the RetroTink 5X's motion adaptive deinterlacing, which in my opinion is the absolute best method we have available to us at the moment, but it's certainly not perfect. Even at Silent Hill 2's lower frame rate, you can still see combing artifacts when there's too much moving on screen, and even when there's no combing artifacts present, details can get blurred in motion. As expected, the Xbox's 480p by comparison is much more smooth. On top of that, we have a huge improvement in the realm of lighting. James's flashlight now uses a per pixel effect for its light cone compared to the PS2's less good-looking per vertex approach. And by that, I mean on the Xbox, the flashlight can actually illuminate a circle where the PS2 could only light up adjacent vertices. Getting back on its operating resolution, the Xbox displays way less shimmering on far-off details, although you will still see a bit of shimmer. In a weird turn, sound effects on the Xbox are stored at a lower bitrate than on PS2, but to be honest, I'm not really sure anyone would be able to notice that without hearing the two versions side by side. This port of the game does come with an extra story campaign starring Maria called Born from a Wish, but honestly I've never really cared much about it. On the plus side, if you do, the PS2's greatest hits version has the same inclusion, so you don't exactly have to let that be a deciding factor. Once again, I played this game with the static filter off, but here's what it looks like when it's on if that's what you're into. What you're probably not into though is random hangs where the game will lock up for a brief second. These aren't exactly going to happen every minute, but it's still very weird when it does. And lastly, I've got to say the default controls here on Xbox are terrible. I mean, if you ask me, this is already one of the worst controllers ever made, but the way SH2 takes advantage of it is by crafting a control scheme that feels like it was developed by someone unaware of how human hands work. On the plus side though, this can be changed, so not exactly a huge deal. Alright, so there are a few downsides you should probably consider here on Xbox, but similarly there are a few really good points that, depending on your situation, might even things out. Sadly though, there is not enough goodwill in this world to excuse the next port, and no, it's not the one you're probably thinking of.
It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true.
Round about a year after Silent Hill 2's original PS2 release, a PC port would hit shelves, and to say that it was subpar would be an understatement. Like I mentioned before, this game really counted on the PS2's specific hardware configuration for a lot of its look and feel, and while the Xbox port saw fit to try and replicate that look to varying degrees of success, the PC port just said screw it and left all kinds of stuff out. We're talking lighting effects, fog layers, shadows. I mean, this is about as bare bones gets. It maintains the original's 30 FPS frame rate and only allows for 4:3 resolutions. I captured this footage at 1600 by 1200, and with all the missing graphical effects aside, I'd say it still looks pretty damn sharp. In fact, maybe a little too sharp. The less detailed shadows from the original get up-resed here, which leads to you being able to see the general shape of James's low-poly projection when a light source is cast on him. In this release, we get the same 30 FPS interpolated cutscenes from the Xbox version, and they look about as bad as they did there, but now at a higher resolution, so you can see all of the issues with more fidelity. A worse issue than the rampant missing assets, though, would be this port's general bugginess. I remember me and a buddy got together one night in 2004 with the goal of beating SH2, and we made the mistake of choosing the PC release. Not only did we have to deal with a lot of crashes, but we also ran into constant issues where the sound would either mess up or just cut out altogether, requiring us to restart the game to get it back. And I would love to be able to tell you that things have changed since then, but while getting this footage, I ran into 3 separate occasions where this happened.
I'm not lying.
If I'm being honest, running into this bug again was sort of nostalgic in a way. But yeah, this was an awful port of SH2, and no one should ever seriously resort to using it, or maybe you should.
I don't know what you're planning, but there's always another way.
Silent Hill 2's famously botched PC port is well known for how badly it butchered the source material, but I'm happy to say SH fans are a resilient bunch, and eventually a few of them got together to right this historic wrong. The Silent Hill 2 Enhanced Edition is a project designed to mod the original SH2 back into the PC port, and I would love to tell you everything this mod improves on, but honestly, I would spend far less time just listing the things it doesn't. Shadows are now softer, audio bugs have been fixed, missing graphical elements have been added back in, widescreen and higher frame rates are now supported, and a nearly infinite list of other improvements. Although I'll say the word improvement is a little misleading. The goal here was to bring the bugged PC release somewhere near parity with the PS2 original, so a lot of care has been taken to make sure not to go too far with what's theoretically possible with modern hardware. Of course, there were a few things they were able to make look a little better, like the original noise filter, which is nice to see, although I still prefer playing with it off. With the inclusion of widescreen support, I'm happy to say that it is true widescreen, which means they're not stretching any 3D assets. On 2D screens, though, they leave it at 4:3, which I think is the right way to handle stuff like this. They also went in and hand-edited each in-engine cutscene to make sure the wider FOV didn't reveal things you weren't supposed to see. Thanks to the zooming that needed to be done to achieve that goal, you're going to want to get rid of letterboxing when widescreen is enabled, and I'll be honest, at first it felt a little strange seeing these scenes this way. The lack of letterboxing really put me off for a while, but I did get used to it, and believe me, it is a small price to pay in order to see this game running in a full 16:9 glorious 4K. If I did have one complaint, it's that the AI upscaled CG cutscenes here look pretty crappy, and the weird motion blur lets me know they used the original PC versions, which already looked bad to begin with. I've got to say, the absolute care and attention to detail that went into this project is nothing short of amazing. I mean, not only was the original PC port a hot mess before these guys got their hands on it, but they've been continually improving on it for years now. And in a perfect world, this is exactly where we would end this segment, on a high note. But no, we've got one more version of Silent Hill 2 to look at, and I would imagine it's the smoldering trash fire a lot of you clicked on this video to see in the first place.
Huh? Are you blind or something?
The Silent Hill HD collection represents a bit of a landmark moment for video games in the HD era, and not the good kind. This thing has been torn apart by nearly every single person who's ever played it before, and by every single person who's ever played the originals, and for good reason. This quote-unquote HD re-release of Silent Hills 2 and 3 does the incredible job of making old PS2 games run poorer and look worse than they did on their original platform. And before we go forward, because this is still a comment I get to this day, yes, I have seen the Great Debates video on Tom Hewlett, both of them, and while they're both really well-made videos with editing and execution much better than what you're watching now, their main crux is that they are essentially a person who started with the conclusion that Tom did nothing wrong and then worked their way backwards from that using nothing but Tom's word as a majority of its analytical foundation. I would say the lion's share of the information you're going to find in that video comes from interviews and quotes from Tom himself, and while that is a good way to do some investigative journalism, they seem to have misplaced some of the quotes and interviews that contradict their thesis statement. They seem to mitigate the amount of control that Tom had over the HD collection, while many of us personally heard Tom assure us that he was an SH fan and he was responsible for every single aspect of the collection. And of course, that starts to sound less and less true when in their own video they talk about how Tom had full control over who was cast for the new voices. And since we're on that subject, they also say flat out that it was Guy Seehe's legal battle with Konami that forced them to re-record voices for both games, but you, me, and The Great Debate have access to interviews from Tom talking about needing to redo the voice work because he wanted it to sound better in 5.1. Not to mention, one of his voice actors, Mary Elizabeth McGlenn, talks about how Tom went into that project with her in mind as a new voice and even planned on penning a new script himself. Listen, I know a lot of you are wondering why the hell I'm spending so much time on this, but hear me out. I try to keep up with my comments, and in doing so, I end up rebutting arguments like this for hours every day. So either I say all this stuff out loud before we get into this release, or I doom myself to an eternity of well-actuallys in my comment section from people who only half understood the Great Debates video on the matter. The TLDR here is that yes, Konami is a shit company and no doubt share a not insignificant portion of the blame for the HD collection. But since two ideas can be simultaneously true, Tom Hewlett, while an okay enough game dev in his own right, has absolutely no idea how to make an HD collection and failed at every single step of the process, leading to everything we're about to talk about. And lest you think I'm piling up on Tom unfairly, his employees also clearly had no idea what they were doing. From the guys implementing the newly recorded voiceovers to the creative decisions made with low-res 2D assets, the ball was dropped at every single possible area of this thing and no one gets out of it clean. And speaking of which, the HD Collection's version of Silent Hill 2 runs at 720p with a 30 FPS target. Much like the PC version we just talked about, this HD collection has a lot of missing elements, and it seems like the ones that actually made it into the collection were mangled beyond belief. Everywhere you look, you'll find altered textures, poor performance, and botched effects. For example, this strange square just floating here off in the distance. Your guess is as good as mine. For some unknowable reason, none of the depth of field effects work here, but if it helps you any, that is the least of our worries moving forward, I assure you. Now you might be saying to yourself, at the end of the day, this is just all visual stuff. What you should really care about is how the game plays, and hot damn is that a way worse subject. Look, I would tell you this game runs like shit, but that would be a terrible disservice to Feces as a whole. When running around Silent Hill, you'll be lucky if you get a consecutive 8 seconds of 30 FPS. And even if you do, you can count on that frame rate dipping as low as 15 immediately after those 8 seconds are up. Thankfully, performance does get a little more smooth once you're inside, but this thing seems to incorporate the Xbox port's weird intermittent jitter, so count on it sort of freezing up on you for a second every once in a while. And since we're on that subject, they also used its smeary 30 FPS CG cutscenes, but somehow managed to make them even more blurry. I mean, look at this in motion. You can barely make out any details at all until Laura stops moving. But to give the devil his due, the 2D elements like items and the fonts look pretty good, and when the game's not slowing down to a crawl, it is relatively sharp. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the new voice cast because so much of that is just going to come down to preference. But if you want my opinion, a lot of these performances change emotional elements in the game and give characters vastly different deliveries, which can alter their personalities.
How do you know that?
Well, I just figured, 'cause this is where you're looking for her.
How do you know that?
Well, I just figured, because this is where you're looking for.
It seems to me Troy Baker's deeper, more commanding voice doesn't fit James as a character, and the same goes for Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, which is weird for me to say because I love both of them in other properties. I mean, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex and The Last of Us, these guys are amazingly talented, they just don't sound good for these characters. On the more objective side of things though, I can say that it was really dumb to have added a slight reverb to every single line recorded as if they were being delivered in an empty hallway or an opera house.
You didn't love Mary anyway.
Oh, wait! How do you know Mary's name?
And the mixing is really poor, with background music often overpowering the voices. Whether or not you prefer these new voice actors over the originals is ultimately going to come down to taste, but on the plus side, at least on Silent Hill 2, you can choose the original voice cast if you're looking to make the objectively correct choice. Here's a little piece of trivia. When it came time for Microsoft to make a very selective list of Xbox 360 games that would be backwards compatible on the Series X, did you know that Silent Hill HD Collection, for some reason, was included? Which actually ends up being a pretty good thing because there were a lot of issues fixed in the process. Not only is this game displayed at an upscaled 4K, but it's also much better at hitting its 30 FPS target compared to the PS3 version. I mean, it's not exactly perfect, you are going to notice some areas with slowdown, but to be fair to this game, the PS2 original didn't exactly keep a rock-solid 30 all the time either. Regardless though, it is a noticeably smoother experience, and while it is nice having the game scaled to 4K, don't go thinking this is some kind of a cure-all for the HD collection. It still has a list of issues the length of my damn arm, but I guess forward progress is forward progress. Oh, and also there's some odd visual garbage at the top and left sides of the screen caused by, I assume, the fog effect. It's not the worst thing in the world, but in bright scenes you might notice it, and if you do, it might be mildly annoying at worst. Look, if you're wanting to play the HD collection for some unknowable reason, or if it's your only choice, God, I hope you have access to a Series X, because while this is nowhere near the originals, it is light years ahead of the experience you would have had on 360 or PS3. And hey, at the end of the day, we should just be happy someone kind of fixed some of the issues here, on a different console, 2 generations later. Okay, so we have a lot of options here, and to be totally honest, a lot of them are really good. Of course, that doesn't include the original PC port and the HD collection, 2 releases that were incompetently handled and developed by people who were similarly very, very bad at their jobs. The PS2 original is always the one that I reach for when it's time to play a little Silent Hill 2, but for obvious reasons, old analog interlaced video can be a deal breaker for most. I would say the Xbox port is just as good, as long as you're not looking for the most accurate to the original experience, and honestly, even if you are, some of the things altered or missing here might be too small for you to even notice, and you really can't discount how much better the Xbox's 480p is going to look on your modern television, that is if that TV has component inputs. The Enhanced Edition is an amazing project that I imagine will become a go-to for a lot of you looking to play this game right now. It's a relatively painless install, and I'm confident you guys know how to find an ISO of that original PC release. With the Enhanced Edition being available for free, there's really no need for anyone to suffer through that original PC version. As far as the HD collection goes, I'm gonna level with you, even though it is objectively bad and lacking in quality in every single conceivable way, if, and this is a big if, you have no other way to experience Silent Hill 2. Well, let's put it this way. The only wrong way to play this game is to not play it at all. And if you do decide to go down this unholy route, please do make sure you play it on a Series X if at all possible. The improvements made there make it so much more playable. Of course, I would recommend your first time playing this game be on a platform that can run it at a consistent frame rate with its original assets intact, but I guess if you know you're in for a shitty time, I mean, it's a free country. I will, however, be adding your name to a watch list of sorts. You know, just in case.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
Are you still following me? Do I have to scream?
Sorry.
After Silent Hill 2 failed to live up to Konami's sales predictions in the West, they made sure the next game was not going to be another spin-off. They wanted a continuation of the first game's story and ideas, and man am I glad in this one instance that Konami sucks so hard, because the result of that decision is what I would call the absolute highest point this series would ever see. In my opinion, Silent Hill 3 is the perfect evolution of the first game's story, combat, and mechanics all wrapped up in the most visually impressive package a Silent Hill title would ever get. And let me assure you, I'm not exaggerating there. As a guy who meticulously analyzes video game graphics, I can say that while future entries in the series might have higher internal resolutions, larger textures, and bigger budgets, none of them get within an arm's reach of SH3's gorgeous presentation and execution. It really is just an absolutely gorgeous video game. But it's not just that, it is also without a doubt in my mind the perfect form of the gameplay style Team Silent created with their first title. It's not the kind of wild evolution that radically changes how well-known series mechanics work, but instead a sort of gradual improvement that sees the style you know and love tweaked just enough so that it's noticeably better while staying recognizably consistent. The game's controls, puzzles, combat, inventory, and overall layout are all exactly the same as what you would find in its 2 predecessors, with only minor tweaks made in the spirit of adding a nice layer of polish. I can't really work out a concrete list or point to any numbers on the matter, but believe me when I say if you were to turn on your PS2 right now, play Silent Hill 2 for an hour, then immediately start up 3, you would notice everything from combat to just moving down a hallway feels more snappy, responsive, and satisfying. And while this next bit is going to be very subjective and definitely controversial, I find the characters here to be more relatable and deeper than the previous title.
Dad, it's me. Yeah. Sorry I didn't call sooner.
Don't get me wrong, Silent Hill 2 made huge strides in serious storytelling, but to me, each character present in that game were just walking examples of negative emotional traits like guilt, depression, trauma, or long repressed rage. Now, there certainly is value in that, and as one of the first games anyone can think of to tackle such dark and troubling subject matter while giving it the serious respect it deserves, it has earned every bit of the nearly infinite praise it's gotten. Okay, I'm going to warn you ahead of time, this is going to sound very lame, but there is certainly a part of James, Angela, and Eddie in all of us, but there's more outside of that narrow spectrum of interpersonal torment, and in my opinion, that's what SH3 handles well. If anything, it's less about one being better than the other, but instead they sort of make up two halves of an emotional yin and yang type of deal, and without a doubt, you couldn't have one without the other. I find a lot about Heather Mason that I identify with, and so to me, Part 3 is the more personal tale, but I don't think that would matter much to anyone outside of me. So feel free to pick which one is your favorite, but in order to do that, you're gonna have to play both, and I very much recommend you do just that. But of course, that brings up the question of how you should go about accomplishing that goal, so what do you say we answer that real quick?
Is this a dream?
There's no doubt that Silent Hill 2 pushed the medium forward as a whole with its amazing presentation, and while 3 can't exactly match the revolutionary jump from 1 to 2, it is without a doubt a massive improvement on the last game. SH2 was no slouch when it came to amazing graphical achievements, but looking at it in retrospect, it is a relatively smooth and more simplistic looking game. The raw polygons were there in terms of geometric complexity, but taking a look at Part 3, we get to see a lot more fine details in things like the skin, textures, and environment. I mean, the freckles on Heather's face alone shows a near generational leap in what the console was capable of, or at the very least, what Team Silent was capable of getting out of the console. It also offers an impressively sharp picture, or I guess I should say it can offer an impressively sharp picture. If you go into SH3's option menu and hit a shoulder button to access the extra options, you'll notice a display mode toggle. There's a normal and sharp mode, and I cannot stress enough, no matter how counterintuitive it is, you do not want to play this game in normal mode. Look, I get they were probably wanting to cut down on aliasing, and I guess that's fine, but this just looks like the screen's been hit with several gallons of Vaseline. It's horrible. And the real problem here is not only are most people new to the game not going to know to head to a secret menu that they're given no prompts on how to access, but this gross looking blurry screen mode is enabled by default. Consider this a bit of a public service announcement. Change this setting as soon as you boot the game up. I promise you, you will not regret it. Alright, so once you've enabled the objectively correct video mode, this game is easily the most impressive visual package that would ever grace the PS2, bar none. Like most games on the console, Silent Hill 3 only offers 480i video output and shoots for an expected 30 FPS target. Just like its predecessor, it's not exactly uncommon to see it miss that mark, but the dips never cross over into what I would call detrimental territory. One really big deal when going from 2 to 3 is something I would imagine most of you have never even really noticed. Back when the first trailers of SH2 hit the scene, that game alone sold thousands of PS2s just based off of its beautiful CG cutscenes, which is why it's a little weird that Team Silent decided Part 3 was going to include exactly 0. Well, alright, maybe there's 1 or 2 pre-recorded scenes, but 99.9% of the time, you're going to be looking at real-time in-engine cutscenes, and as you can see, they look incredible. It is a little strange that Team Silent decided to throw out one of the previous game's defining features, but I can respect it. They clearly had a lot of confidence in 3's real-time graphics, and obviously that confidence was not misplaced. Outside of the presentation though, like I said earlier, Silent Hill 3 is the final form of the SH formula. Sure, there may have been other games that came after it, but this right here is where this style of game both peaked and ended. Progression is handled in the typical Silent Hill style, with survival horror exploration and puzzle solving broken up by shifts to the other world as a sort of environmental refresh. Combat works exactly like it always has in the series, and just about the only new addition I can think of are equipable items that have a sort of risk-reward system tied to them, like a bulletproof vest which reduces incoming damage while also severely decreasing your run speed. The PS2 original release of Silent Hill 3 is a lot like 2 in the sense that it leveraged the PS2's unique architecture in order to achieve effects that just couldn't be found on competing hardware.
Don't talk about my dad like that!
I would assume because of the uphill battle that was their last attempt at one, we never saw an Xbox port for 3, but we did see a PC release. One that, while not as plagued by issues as Part 2's, still isn't great, or at least it's not out of the box. On PC, Silent Hill 3 suffers from a few major problems, but honestly not as many as you might think given its age. On a more surprising note, I was able to get it installed and running on Windows 10 with no issues, plus it recognizes my wired Xbox Series X controller, so that definitely is nice. But this version of the game suffers from a pretty massive flaw. One that isn't much of an issue now, but used to make it a pain in the ass to play way back in my day. This version of SH3 uses what's called a double buffer VSync, which means if you drop even a single frame below 60 FPS, this game will go all the way down to 30 until 60 is possible again. Now, because the hardware I'm running this game on is so much better than what's necessary, I couldn't get footage of this issue in motion, but here's a fun little fact. The very first video I ever uploaded on this channel was a review of Silent Hill 3, and in that video you can see this happening quite a lot. On top of the frame rate, sound effects in this port play back at a much lower bitrate than on PS2, and for some reason they're in a different key. I really doubt anyone but the hardcore Silent Hill fan will notice this, but if it does get on your nerves too much, there is a fix available. And speaking of which, while I can give this port credit for actually running on modern hardware, we can definitely do better. If you make your way over to Silent Hill 3's PC Gaming Wiki page, you'll find a lot of patches there, but the one I always grab is the widescreen fix by Steam 006. By the way, I didn't mean for that to rhyme as well as it did. Despite what's described in its name, there's a few cool aspects to this patch, but most importantly, it's going to let you drive the game to your monitor's resolution and aspect ratio. If you haven't noticed yet, it also allows for 60 frames per second. And after coming straight from the PS2 version, 60 FPS in widescreen feels really damn nice. And let me assure you, this is the right kind of widescreen patch. It doesn't just stretch the on-screen graphics, but instead opens up the viewable area to fill the screen. 2D assets like maps and puzzles are pillar boxed, and to be honest, that's exactly how I like it. Although I will say I don't like how the text gets a softer scale at higher resolutions. It's definitely not a deal breaker, but maybe something I'd like to see fixed in a different patch. And when you do hit those higher resolutions, there's one inherent flaw you'll notice here. For some reason, they didn't port over the PS2 version's soft shadows. This hard-edged, unblended look definitely isn't as convincing as the original and even shows off the low poly count for the Shadow Heather cast. If you're paying attention, you can actually count the amount of shapes that make up each limb. Now, this definitely isn't a horrible trade-off to see the game running at 4K, but in some scenarios it can make for a bit of an eyesore, especially since this game was built around the idea of dynamic lights and shadows. Oh, and one last thing, the sharp and normal display modes in the menu don't do anything here, which is almost not worth mentioning, but I kinda thought it was interesting, so what the hell. Of course, I would have loved an enhanced edition sort of approach for this game, but with a single download, you can turn this just barely functional PC port into a much better option for Silent Hill fans, and that's certainly not something you can say about this next port.
What the hell is this thing?
Okay, so I imagine you guys already know how bad the HD collection is. I mean, even if you didn't watch the SH2 section of this video, you've likely heard about it. Well, this is something that doesn't seem to get as much press since SH2 is the only video game ever created in most people's minds, but Silent Hill 3 got treated way worse in this remaster. First up, thanks to some legal controversy, Konami wasn't able to use Heather's original voice here, so you're gonna have to play this game with the brand new voice cast. And believe me when I say these are some top tier voice actors, people who have done incredible work in the industry. A fact that really makes you wonder why each one of them sucks so damn hard here. My main girl, Heather Mason, sounds like a caricature of a teenager that a woman in her late 40s would do when making fun of the way kids talk nowadays.
All I know is that things are getting really screwy around here, and I've got a weird feeling it has something to do with me.
And in nearly every single scene, you'll find these new actors changing line delivery to the point where the performances lose their original emotional effect. You know, the one that the developers intended for them to have. Like here, where in the original, Heather is pissed at Douglas for his possible hand in what she just went through, and she responds with a mocking sort of frustration.
If I knew that, I wouldn't be so confused, would I?
But in the HD collection, she sounds scared and almost like she's pleading with him for some reason.
If I knew that, I wouldn't be so confused, would I?
Listen, I know these sound like small gripes, but scenes like this form the basis for Heather's character as a whole. They're supposed to help the player feel certain emotions. It's like messing with the foundation of a building. Even small changes at the bottom can turn into massive problems for the floors above. Outside of that, I would say the performance is even worse than SH2, but with an interesting twist. So technically speaking, SH3 runs at 60 frames per second, but you'll only see it hit that frame rate in the most simplistic areas, and even then you'll see it swing back down to 30 a lot. I really mean it, you will almost never see this game run at 60 FPS. And you might be thinking that 30 FPS doesn't seem too bad given that's what the original ran at on PS2, but the erratic frame times is what makes the game feel so choppy and unresponsive. It's hard to explain, but essentially since the game isn't delivering frames at consistent and reliable timings, you can never really get used to how much lag there is between you pressing a button and that action showing up on screen. Oh, and remember how I thought the stuttering on SH2's original Xbox port was bad? Well, here it happens non-stop. You'll be running around and the game just hitches up for a second. It stops completely and then moves on like it never even happened. With all of these issues and the fact that it rarely ever hits 60 FPS, I'm left wondering why they didn't just cap it at 30, or better yet, why they couldn't figure out how to make a PS2 game run at its original frame rate reliably on much more powerful hardware. On the plus side, the game is really sharp looking, and even at its relatively low 720p on PS3, cutscenes can look really damn good. I just wish those cutscenes were taking place in an HD remaster made by people who had even the slightest clue what was going on and how to do their jobs. Oh, and speaking of which, there's a very weird issue I noticed where some areas have the game leaving a strange sort of ghosting on edges when characters are in motion. It is very noticeable without my help, but let's slow things down so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. This problem seems to be location-based because you can even see it in a cutscene taking place in the same hallway. And speaking of cutscenes, much like SH2, don't expect any depth of field effects. For some reason, that effect didn't make it over to the PS3, and if you don't know what depth of field is, take a look at the background behind Douglas on the PS2 versus the PS3. Listen, I'm not saying that these effects make or break the video game or absolutely change how it's going to affect somebody, but if you're going to remaster a game from the PS2 era, at the very least, at the absolute minimum, I expect you to have the same stuff that was in that PS2 version. Moving over to a more powerful platform shouldn't necessitate getting rid of effects that worked perfectly well on the processing equivalent to a Ring doorbell camera. Well, anyways, the point is, just like SH2, this version of Silent Hill 3 exists solely either for the sad few who can only experience these games on modern consoles, or for those of us who already have to point and laugh at it.
They've come to witness the beginning. The rebirth of paradise, unspoiled by mankind.
And just like before, playing this game on Series X does slightly improve things. First off, we get an upscaled 4K image, which honestly does look pretty good, and to combat the rampant drops from 60 to 30, this version of SH3 is capped at 30 frames per second. Listen, I am the last person to advocate for a lower overall frame rate, but compared to the constant fluctuations on PS3, this was definitely the right move. As a result, the game feels so much smoother to play even though it's technically running slower. As far as I can tell, there haven't been any other improvements aside from the resolution and frame rate, which is a little disappointing. I mean, it would have been nice if they would have fixed the weird ghosting issue, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. And to be fair to the game, the sharp and clean looking video outside of the areas that cause ghosting looks amazing in 4K. The edges are so damn sharp you'll cut your eyes looking at them, and it makes for a great looking image. There is, however, one strange artifact present here that I've got to assume is caused by the upscale. I noticed this diagonal line where it looks like the screen is slightly shifted. This weird distortion is slight in most scenarios, but shots where you can see a lot of the floor or complex textures make it much more apparent. I'm not really sure if this is from bad scaling on the part of whoever made this playable on Series X, or if maybe it's an artifact that was in the original 360 release, but either way, it's just kind of interesting it exists. And again, I will say that this is a much better option if you absolutely have to play the HD collection. I imagine the altered voices will be a deal breaker for series vets, but I guess more options are better than less, even if it's only slightly better.
You don't know even that?
That's why I'm asking.
Unlike my conclusion for Silent Hill 2, I have no reservation saying the PS2 original is the best option for someone looking to play SH3 today. Sadly, we never got anything like the Enhanced Edition mod project for its PC release, which means we're all stuck with some nasty looking shadows and a little bit of technical know-how necessary for getting it up and running in the first place. Although, that being said, it is without a doubt preferable to the experience that is to be had with the HD collection. Unlike Silent Hill 2, we're talking about more than just performance hiccups and bad code. We're dealing with fundamental changes to the game's most important feature, its story. You might think a change in voice actors wouldn't be that big of a deal, but believe me, it makes a huge difference in the game's emotional impact, and if you're wanting to play these games, that impact is going to be key in whether or not it leaves a mark on you, the same way it did for all of us who played it back when it first came out. If I were to make a little hierarchy here, the PS2 original would be at the top, but given the fact that most people aren't even likely to have displays that could accept a PS2's analog video, the PC version is the next best option. It still suffers from issues the original didn't, and you're gonna need to be at least a little familiar with playing old games on new PCs to get it working well, but if you don't have a PS2 and you're not looking to put in a little elbow grease on PC, the HD collection is your only other option, which should only be considered in extreme situations of life or death. And sure, maybe I'm exaggerating there, but honestly, not as much as you might think.
I'm not interested.
Look, the fact of the matter is, Silent Hill 3 is very important to me, and what I want more than anything is for those of you watching to get even a fraction of my first experience with it when and if you decide to pick it up. And while you might have a great time with SH3 and it may get under your skin in all the right ways regardless of how you experience it, I know for a fact the PS2 original works in that regard. As for the other options, well, I can't exactly vouch for them. Okay, so let's break this down into two key points. 1, please play Silent Hill 3. It's one of the best video game stories ever made. And 2, please play it on PS2, or at the very least with its original voice cast. Anything outside of that, and I can't make any guarantees. And before you go thinking that's a threat, just know it is. And this right here is when things start to change for our plucky little series. Silent Hill 4: The Room is swamped in controversy. Not only did it almost completely change up key components of the series like combat, exploration, and overall structure, but it also added to the pre-established story of Silent Hill. Something most people would agree should be done with the utmost care, and since it felt so radically different from the games that were supposed to have spawned it, people started to wonder if this was even supposed to be an entry in the Silent Hill series to begin with. Even to this day, it's a hotly debated subject. Which, if I'm being honest with you, is a little strange. I mean, it would be one thing if this was some kind of garden variety Silent Hill theorizing. That's fair game and fun to take part in. But even today, you'll see people arguing over the subject, despite the fact that we have quotes from Masashi Subayama, series vet and the Room's art director, letting us know straight up that this project was being worked on under the title of Room 302 and was only turned into a Silent Hill game for financial reasons sometime after development had already started. The guy even says if Silent Hill had never existed, the room would have still been made. You would imagine this would spell case closed on the matter, but when you combine the volatile nature of internet discourse with the pure insanity of the Silent Hill fandom, well, you get something resembling an average night at a Waffle House. Controversy aside though, the room does a lot to change up the kind of experience you might have been expecting given the title on the front of the box, and the first few moments of the game make that very clear when you're given a first-person perspective to move around in. After the first major area, you'll find out the apartment that you're stuck in acts as a bit of a hub section that can be returned to via these tunnels. Just being in the apartment heals you, which makes return trips pretty damn important for people looking to conserve resources, but it can also be a major factor in progressing through external areas. Essentially, if you find yourself stuck at any one point, just try going back to your apartment and examining some stuff. You'll probably find what you need to move forward. In combat, you'll find the first instance of an on-screen heads-up display, and I think you already know my opinion, but this makes the whole game feel a little cheaper and more video gamey. SH fans will know that throughout the series you've been able to cook your attacks for a stronger hit, but the room gives you an on-screen meter to let you know when you've reached a full charge, and I know I'm weird with this stuff, but does this not sort of ruin the magic of playing an SH title? Like, am I insane?
That's right.
Well, I'm assuming a lot of you have just answered yes, so moving on, one change that I can say is actually really fun in theory is bringing a survival horror staple, the limited inventory system, to a Silent Hill game for the first time. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you'll know I've always enjoyed working around this kind of constraint in Resident Evil games, but the big difference there is that you could exchange items at any of the boxes scattered around the environment. The room, on the other hand, makes you return to your apartment every time, and that may not seem like too big of a deal, but every time you do this, you're going to have to skip the transition of crawling through the tunnel, then skip the scene that plays when you wake up in your bed, then sit through a relatively long black screen to exit the bedroom, then get your inventory sorted, and then one more black screen to the bathroom, and skip the scene of you crawling through the hole again. It is a massively drawn-out process, and I feel like it wouldn't have been too hard to fix it. Like, maybe just put the item chest in your bedroom, or maybe have the doors to the living room and bathroom stay open after the intro area. I mean, there's gotta be a better way. On a first playthrough, you're likely gonna have to do this a lot, and I feel like it wouldn't have taken much effort to improve the experience a bit. On top of that, there's the infamous second half of the game, which, without spoiling anything, is essentially one long escort mission that determines the ending you're gonna get. If you ask me, everything centered around this game is a huge mess, but hey, we're not here to figure out which games you should be playing, but instead which version of each game. And that being said, the room released on both Xbox and PS2 simultaneously, so what do you say we start off by seeing how well Sony fared? On the PlayStation 2, the very first thing I noticed is that the game is heavily dithered. Something that doesn't necessarily offend me. I mean, I love the Dreamcast, and like 30% of that thing's video output was dithering. I guess it's just strange to see this happening, not only in a game released so far into the PS2's life cycle, but in a series that has achieved far better looking results without dithering. This effect is definitely easy enough to spot in person, but I'm not 100% YouTube's compression algorithm isn't going to crush these small details, so you should be able to see what I'm talking about in the black part of the screen here, if anything. Luckily though, this and every other version of the room allows you to turn the static effect off in the options, which is exactly what we're going to do moving forward. Either because of or in spite of the dithering though, I noticed the picture here is incredibly blurry. It's way less sharp than the other two SH games on PS2, and that's really strange to me. Just like with Silent Hill 2, for some reason my software is telling me this game runs at 60 frames per second, which I'm pretty sure isn't true. I'm almost positive every single PS2 SH game runs at 30 FPS, so I'm not sure why this keeps happening, but regardless, just like those other titles, the room only offers 480i on PS2, and like I said, I'm pretty sure a 30 FPS target. So again, when you're looking at these numbers, just mentally cut them in half. And I've got to say, the game actually runs relatively smoothly, although in the first-person sections you can see that frame rate fluctuate a lot. It feels kind of gross moving the camera around in these sections, and I'm really glad you don't have to do anything more than just move around in your apartment in this perspective, or else it would border on unplayable. Even at 480i, it is clear the textures here are mega detailed. Just the stubble on Harry's face alone shows a lot more intricate detail than you'd find on any other Silent Hill game on PS2, which is why it's so damn painful to see how dirty the game got done lighting-wise. With previous entries in the series, there was a big emphasis on dark environments being lit by the character's dynamic flashlight, but here there's almost no dynamic light sources, and you'll even find areas where the game's shadow maps are baked into the background texture, and that looks about as static and cheap as you'd think. I find that pretty damn strange because the last two SH games were such showstoppers in that sense. It's almost like, and hear me out on this one, you're gonna need your tinfoil hats. This was never meant to be a Silent Hill game and went through most of its early development with the kind of funding that would go to a side project and not the next numbered entry in a money-making series. Aside from the presentation comments, I found it very annoying that the game defaults to the no option when picking up an item. So if you're running from enemies or trying to make it through an area without getting hit and you see an item on the floor, you'll probably be mashing the pick up button, and that means you're probably going to leave it exactly where it is. I know this sounds like a small issue, but trust me, it's going to take you a long time to get used to. I also really didn't like this game's combat. Mechanically, the room just feels less satisfying to play in general, and that could just be my bias, but I want you to look me straight in the face and tell me this section is something you would see in a game that was well made. There are so many elements here that just feel cheap or underbaked, like these dogs being able to essentially teleport to your location when they attack. The second area of the game is filled with these things, and you flat out aren't going to have the resources to put them all down, so you're probably going to have to run, and even then it's a dice roll whether or not they cheese you with a few good hits every time you go through this area. On a first playthrough, you're probably going to be backtracking through this area a lot to find out what to do next, and that means you'll be taking a lot of hits and then having to go back to the apartment to heal, which, like I said before, is an entire process that you probably don't want to do more than necessary. That stuff aside, I like the general exploration and puzzle solving in the room, and the areas you do that exploring in are really cool. They have this uncanny sort of feel to them where they're just enough like a place you've probably seen before, but little things are off. Like, sure, we've all seen a subway station, but why in the hell is this flesh tube just sitting here? I like that a lot. Maybe I'm a flesh tube guy, I don't know. Although I will say it is strange the way these areas are laid out. Most Silent Hill games are played in tight hallways leading to a million locked doors and maybe 5 that aren't, but the room's areas are sort of structured like a traditional action game to me. Big, wide open places broken up by loading screens. That's not exactly a complaint per se, but it is very different and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I do, however, know exactly how I feel about this next little tidbit. Silent Hill 4, for some unknowable reason, decided to use breakable melee weapons, and since there are unbreakable ones you can come across, that's not the worst downside in the world, but it does feel very off for a game like this. I mean, I guess sure, try new things out, but this seems to fly in the face of how these games are typically played. There are certainly worse things you could put in a Silent Hill title, and we will cover that as the series goes on, but when you're working over an enemy and your weapon breaks, it just leaves you wondering why the hell they thought this would be a good idea. And I guess let's end this one on a bad note with one last complaint. Henry here is one of the most bland, unemotional, uninteresting characters in video game history, bar none. He almost never speaks, but when he does, it's with this delivery that feels like he's just barely on the verge of kind of being interested in what he's talking about.
I feel like I'm dying.
And I know fans of this game like to say that this was on purpose, but I just find it a little too convenient that this purposeful inclusion works the exact same way it would had he have been poorly written and voiced on accident. I mean, people give Ethan from RE7 and 8 shit for being bland and having no character, but that guy's a world-class method actor compared to Henry. And, well, I think I've dunked on this game enough. Let's move on to the Xbox port, a subject I'm happy to say is a little more positive.
Something big is gonna happen. Finally, it's gonna happen!
On Microsoft's Xbox, Silent Hill 4 is bumped up to a much easier on the eyes 480p, and man, when I say this version has a clearer picture, I really mean it. You can really make out a lot more detail in that doubled vertical resolution, and of course it helps this port doesn't have any dithering. In every single conceivable way, it is a much more visually attractive picture without a doubt. And on that note, there's something sort of odd going on here. Character outlines have this blurred edge sort of thing applied, and going back and taking a look at my PS2 footage, that does seem to maybe be happening here too, but at a severely diminished degree. If you ask me, this has the telltale signs of we made this game on PS2 hardware and had to approximate those techniques on Xbox written all over it. After seeing the same scenario go down with Silent Hill 2, I'm willing to bet my life on it. On the plus side, we get a more consistent frame rate here, which is nice, and so this is kind of odd. My software is also telling me this game is 60 frames per second, so I don't know, maybe Silent Hill 4 runs at 60 FPS. Either way, on PS2 I didn't find the frame rate to be terrible or anything, but it was prone to random stutters and drops every so often, and that doesn't seem to be the case here on Xbox. There are, however, a few downsides that I assume come with the more consistent frame rate and 480p output though, and they both have to do with the cutscenes. I noticed what looks like Z-fighting at the boundaries of animated sections of a character's face, making for some weird looking black garbage around the corners of mouths and eyes. It's not really terrible, but once you see it, you probably won't be able to stop, and that might be an issue for some. Other than those gripes though, this is a pretty damn good way to play Silent Hill 4. It is sort of interesting how it manages to counter every single advantage it has over the PS2 version with some other equal downside, but as a whole, I'd say the more consistent frame rate and sharper, more clear presentation makes it a really good choice. So why don't we move on to the next option and see how that goes?
Help me.
What? The cord's cut.
Right out of the box, SH4 on PC makes for one hell of a weak showing. Not only are the shadows from the PS2 version missing, but it also lacks a few of the hauntings that could be activated on console, and it's got a hard 30 FPS ceiling, and for the life of me, I could not tell you why that is. As you might expect for a PC port of its day, it only supports 4:3 aspect ratios and has a very hard time working on Windows 10. Luckily though, the glorious PC Gaming Wiki has us covered with a patch made again by Steam 006. This allows the game to use widescreen resolutions and squashes a few bugs, among other things. The more astute of you may have noticed I didn't mention it fixing the 30 FPS problem, and that is for a very good reason. I think a lot of this game's animations and physics are tied to its frame rate, which in turn seems to be tied to the actual game speed, so while there are 60 FPS fixes out there, it makes some enemies unhittable and causes a bug that makes the game unbeatable, so I'd say you're probably better off just sticking with 30. Frame rate aside though, in my opinion, after deciding to play the PC port of SH4, the very next thing you should be doing is downloading this fix. After patching the game and taking a look at its cutscenes, it's very clear they used the Xbox version as a base for this port, which means you're gonna see the same Z-fighting issues and the weird Halo-like blurry outlines. At 4K, as you would imagine, this is much harder to look at, and I really mean that. No joke, looking at this somehow tricked my eyes into thinking they were bad, and it was really uncomfortable for me. Heading back to the PC Gaming Wiki while doing research, I found out the fix that I downloaded did have an option to get rid of the blurry edges in its .ini, and I just didn't see it, so make sure to tweak that value for your eyes' sake. Warts and all though, I would say this is just a higher res, less likely to slow down version of the Xbox port, and honestly, that's kinda good. I'm sure a majority of people looking to play Silent Hill 4 today aren't going to have their old PS2 or Xbox still hooked up to a TV, so something like this makes the game accessible for people who may have never tried it before. That being said, I find the room loses a lot of its visual charm when you play it at 4K. Textures that used to look detail-rich on console just look overly smooth here, and me thinking the lighting was flat on PS2 is kind of funny because the PC and Xbox versions lack even the simplistic shadows found there. And since this is so similar to the Xbox port, I guess we can go ahead and wrap this whole thing up by getting to what I recommend.
Henry, I found the exit. Come to the turnstile. Hurry!
Okay, so it's fair to say Silent Hill 4 The Room is far from my favorite entry in the series, but I can admit it has an undeniable charm, and truth be told, if it was released as Room 302 like it was supposed to, I probably would have liked it much more. But for those of you who do want to play this game, and I recommend you do that, which version should you go with? Well, just like SH2, I get the feeling development here was mainly focused around the PlayStation 2, which means all the visual effects will be at their best on that console. And typically, that's enough for me to give my recommendation, but I'll admit the PS2 port does have a very soft, muddy look to it. Comparing it to the Xbox makes for a night and day sort of scenario, and the presentation dork in me wants to say that's the way to go. Of course, it is crazy to expect everyone to hold on to every console they had as a teenager, so the PC port is definitely the best option as far as convenience goes, but make sure you get your hands on that fan-made patch or you'll be having an objectively worse time with it. Personally though, the overly smooth look you get from the higher resolutions on PC makes the game lose a little of its visual character, leading to it seeming even less attractive than it actually is. So if you are looking to go the hard route, I would say the Xbox port running through an upscaler like the OSSC or RetroTink 5X is without a doubt the way to go. But no matter what resolution you're playing at, you sadly do have to play through the second half of the game. My condolences.
I think I drank too much last night.
Silent Hill Origins was the very first entry in what most fans would call the Western developed arc of the franchise. This was a point when Konami had disbanded Team Silent and essentially gave the keys to the series over to any developer with the mental fortitude to put together a PowerPoint presentation. I think most would agree this was a relatively dark time for the franchise. I mean, we had a bunch of people who didn't really understand what these games were about, releasing what amounted to their best guesses. So from here on out, I wouldn't expect anything to accurately recreate any of the experiences you may have had with previous entries. That being said, there are some solid video games that came out of this era, and I would argue the very first Western-developed Silent Hill title is one of them.
You all left that girl to burn.
So we did. The world is stranger than you think.
You're crazy.
Right off the bat, Silent Hill Origins piqued the absolute hell out of my interest, mostly because it was an SH game releasing on my favorite handheld of all time, the PSP. I mean, think about it. Traditional Silent Hill gameplay, but on the go. It was a match made in heaven, or maybe Heaven's Night. If you get what it was a Silent Hill. I made a Silent Hill joke.
Ah! I've always hated you!
Now, obviously, the finished product would stray a good deal from that Silent Hill benchmark, which at the time was a red flag for me, but given the context of what would come after its release, Origin looks like a damn shot-for-shot remake of the first game by comparison. Among the biggest offenders as far as challenging SH gameplay doctrine goes, we had breakable melee weapons and transitions to the other world that could be triggered by the player at will. The former leading to a hilariously common scenario where you might have 30 or 40 weapons on you at one time, some of them being full CRT televisions. I'll admit this mechanic was more annoying than it was innovative or fun, but it doesn't get too in your way while you're playing the game. The developers made sure every single area is littered with potential weapons, so while you might have to settle with an IV stand when a good weapon ends up breaking, it's not like you'll be in a panic trying to find something to replace it all the time. As for the otherworld transitions, this is something I'm still a little torn on, because on one end it does radically alter one of Silent Hill's biggest traits, but on the other it essentially turns exploration into another type of puzzle, an idea I am very much in favor of. In SH proper, the other world was a place you didn't necessarily want to be in. It was thrust upon you, and that made it sort of intimidating. It was sort of a genius move because through gameplay they were able to have us feel just like our in-game avatars, whereas Origins gives you full control over when you do and don't access the other world, which does take away that psychological effect it used to have. Now it sort of feels like just the next area, a place that could be entered and exited at any point, and that does sort of cheapen the effect. On the flip side though, it adds an extra layer to puzzle solving. If you've reached a roadblock, try the other world where maybe that roadblock doesn't exist, and vice versa. In this game, you have two versions of the same exact area that you can move between at will, doubling the potential hiding places for key items. These are very good things, especially for someone like me who specifically enjoys these games for their puzzle solving and exploration. To be honest, I was very torn on this issue when Origins first launched, and I still haven't come down on any one side of it. Mostly though, I can say it does add a flair to the gameplay that is welcome. I just wish it didn't come at the cost of one of Silent Hill's most recognizable narrative elements. Overall though, I would say this is a relatively fun Silent Hill game. It offers some really nice puzzles and exploration. I mean, certainly not the most in-depth version of either of those elements you've ever played, but for a handheld game, it's far better than you might have expected. At the time, I was pretty blown away that Origin's portable nature didn't have the development team changing more gameplay elements to make it fit better into a pick-up-and-play kind of ethos. And looking back with 2020 hindsight, this would end up being the absolute most faithful Western-developed entry in the Silent Hill series we would see. Which is quite the statement when seeing what this game could have been. Early in its life, Origins looked and played very differently from its finished state. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this would have been a much worse game judging by early prototype footage, but luckily the team responsible for this build would go belly up before being able to finish it. And normally I wouldn't go around celebrating game studios being shut down, but I mean, you know, extenuating circumstances. Regardless though, they left that mess for another studio to clean up, and I'm glad those guys did such a good job because what we're left with is a fine enough SH game all things considered. And for that exact reason, I 100% recommend you guys go and check out Silent Hill Origins. And for those of you looking to take me up on that recommendation, you've got two potential ways of going about doing that. The original PSP release of Origins makes a massive impact for such a small package. Graphically speaking, the game looks gorgeous given the hardware, and if the concept of seeing the town of Silent Hill rendered on a PSP doesn't get you at least a little chubbed up, I don't think you're in the right place here. Just like its home console forefathers, Origin follows a format that sees you navigating the town of Silent Hill in order to find the next interior area to explore, which acts like a dungeon for lack of a better word. After you've cleared that section, you're spit back out into the town where the process can repeat itself, and once again I was surprised to see this layout remain so unchanged given the platform. As you're running around, you'll notice a damn smooth frame rate, although not quite perfect. You might see a dip into the 45 FPS range, but that's never a steady drop, and it was infrequent enough that it never really bothered me. On the plus side though, 60 frames per second for a full 3D Silent Hill game on a handheld? Pretty impressive. I'm using a hacked PS TV right now to capture footage, which allows me to take advantage of an app called Sharp Scale, something that lets me deactivate the blurry filter used on stock PS TVs to mask aliasing. I'm using the PS TV's 720p mode, which means the PSP's native resolution of 480 by 272 is being increased by about 2.5 times within that 720p window. The good news is the PS TV is basically just a Vita without a screen, and the Vita supported PSP games on a hardware level, so you could be sure you're looking at an accurate picture. Video stuff aside, I'll say one of Origin's less well-handled components would be its controls. I mean, moving around a single screen feels good enough, especially for a game being controlled with a PSP's tiny little analog nub, but when the camera angles change suddenly, it's going to take you a second to reorient. Like most games using rapid camera changes and analog controls, whatever direction you're holding when the perspective changes will continue moving you in the correct direction even though your controls have changed, but waver from that heading even a millimeter and the analog stick will change over to the new orientation. Most of the time this won't be a massive issue, but it will stop you in your tracks a few times till you get used to it. On that same note, there are portions of some areas that use a fixed camera, and you know damn well that's something I like to see, but with these analog controls, moving into one of these areas can be a nightmare. Once you cross that threshold into the new fixed perspective, it's not uncommon for you to run right out of it again thanks to the change in controls, and this never gets any easier. I guarantee you're going to have to exit and re-enter these parts a few times before you're able to actually move around inside of them. One good thing to consider is that this game, despite not being a Team Silent title, boasts an Akira Yamaoka soundtrack, and while it's certainly not on the same level as SH's 1, 2, or 3, it's got some absolutely killer tracks and brings some solidly creepy ambiance. Silent Hill Origins is a very impressive title. Sure, its story may have taken way too many liberties with SH canon, and it may have made what some might call drastic changes to key aspects of its gameplay. It's still a surprisingly accurate take on the series, especially given the fact that it's a game meant to be played on the bus. I really can't figure out what I like more, the survival horror style gameplay or the fact that it's taken place on a PSP, but either way it's an awesome little package. Sadly, the PSP didn't exactly have the largest install base, so a game that stayed on the platform could really only expect so much success. And so Konami did something pretty damn interesting, something I've only ever seen a couple of times. It took a portable exclusive title and made it a full home console release.
You're the girl from the fire. How did you...
A year after Origin's original PSP release, we'd get a PS2 version, which was weird for a few reasons. First off, it was a PS2 game being released 2 full years after the PS3 hit the scene, and second, it was one of the very few games that went from portable to home console, where usually that path goes in the opposite direction. Hell, off the top of my head, I can only really think of one example, Resident Evil Revelation, so we've already got a pretty interesting port on our hands. This remaster of sorts has the same 60 FPS target as the original and operates at 480i as opposed to the PSP's 272p. And right when the game starts up, you're hit with another interesting little tidbit. Turns out this is one of the few PS2 games that lets you switch to a widescreen display option, and since it's available, I figured, well, we might as well use it for our capture footage. This probably goes without saying, but the storage space on a dual-layer DVD is far greater than what you'd find on a UMD, meaning CG cutscenes show far less compression artifacts, which is always nice. And with the increased resolution of the PS2, we get far more detailed textures compared to the PSP, which is to be expected. What took me by surprise, though, is the fact that the PS2 port has such a dark picture, and to add insult to injury, this version gets rid of the brightness slider from the original, so you're stuck with it. I will say it's not exactly prohibitively dark. I mean, you will be able to see your surroundings to an okay degree, but it's definitely on the borderline, and depending on your TV, it may cross over into being problematic. One of my only real issues with the PSP original was how thick and low-res the static filter was, and there is an option to disable it, but it's only unlocked after you beat the game. Luckily, I have beaten this version before, so I went ahead and turned it off, but by this point in the video, that shouldn't be surprising anyone. I also noticed that readable files in this release have a backing image behind them, where the PSP version leaves things blank. Not exactly something worth writing home about, but it's nice to see little improvements like this. Overall, the PS2 port of Origins is everything you liked about the original, but with a slight, noticeable facelift, and a 77% increase in vertical resolution. Yeah, I crunched those numbers. It controls exactly the same, only now you get to use a more ergonomic controller. Graphically, I would say it definitely does not live up to its older brothers, Silent Hills 2 and 3, but it looks great regardless. It's certainly lacking some of the polish you would expect from a PS2 game released during the PS3 era, but considering its portable origins, I really don't think that's something you could hold against it. So which one of these two options should you go with? Well, that's kind of a hard one. Honestly, both of these ports have their merits. They both look and perform really well, and each option offers the same exact experience, barring a few extras that you would gain from moving up to the PS2. Really, what makes one better than the other is likely to come down to what consoles you have access to. If you've got a PS2 Model 2 or a PS TV sitting in a closet somewhere, you're good to go for that version, at least as far as playing it on a TV goes. Now, of course, you could get yourself a PSP copy of the game legit, but honestly, the price has been rising steadily. Couple that with the absolute ease of installing custom firmware on a PSP or PS Vita, and you've got a really strong argument for piracy. It is, of course, far more likely that you're going to have a PS2 kicking around somewhere, and if that is the case, you're not missing out on anything going that route, except for the novelty of playing such a cool game on such a low-power device like the PSP. You will probably have to crank up the brightness of your display a bit, but that's about the only downside I can think of. Just like the PSP original, the PS2 port sits a little too high up on the used market for my liking, so grabbing a $15 free McBoot memory card off of Amazon might be a better use of your hard-earned money, but no matter which direction you go, you're gonna have a good time. Now, like I keep saying, this may not be an accurate Silent Hill game as far as the story is concerned, but it is without a doubt the most accurate game released in the series to date as far as gameplay goes. And moving forward, that is going to mean a lot more, trust me.
Are you on something? I'm Dahlia. Hottest piece of ass you'll ever see in this town.
And now we have officially moved into what I like to call the Silent Hill is fully up to interpretation, and every interpretation is equally valid and true era. Silent Hill Shattered Memories was slated from the get-go as a reimagining of the first game in the franchise, a project meant to take the old mansion that was that first entry and rip everything down to the foundation, building up something new in its place. And this may be a little surprising, but I don't exactly think that's the worst idea in the world. I do love a good what-if scenario, and it seemed clear to me this was not a direction the rest of the series was looking to go in, so I might have been more welcoming than most. In fact, it wasn't the whole reimagining thing that got me, it was the fact that it was a Wii game.
Some trouble, honey?
No, Lucy, this man here is just a little confused.
As strong as the SH fanboy fires burn inside of me, they pale in comparison to how much I do not take the Wii seriously, and let's be fair, I have every reason not to. That being the case, I didn't end up playing Shattered Memories until I covered it in my Silent Hill retrospective, and I was genuinely surprised at how much I enjoyed it. The story told here is one that's supremely personal and feels uniquely interesting. It really had an effect on me, so I was relatively quick to sing its praises. Looking back now with fresh eyes, though, I am sort of left wondering, what about this required the use of the Silent Hill IP? Like I said, it's a great story with some absolutely solid atmosphere, but without spoiling anything, the only element present from that original property are the names. You may recognize a few characters by name and name alone, or the town itself, but that's it. The lake's spiritual power plays no role, there's no cult practices, even the facing of your inner demons trope popularized in 2 has nothing to do with Silent Hill bringing your deepest emotions to life, but instead it's brought about by a regular old visit to the shrink. And again, this is coming from someone who does very much enjoy this game's story, but I really am wondering what here required the word Silent Hill to be printed on the box. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I really mean it when I say there is nothing in this game taken from the original title that isn't just a name. Character traits, story themes, plot points, gameplay, overall structure, items, and inventory at all. I mean, nothing makes the transition, and I don't know, that kind of weirds me out. It's obvious the developers had a kick-ass story in mind here, and it's one I'm genuinely glad I experienced, but without a doubt, they just used the brand recognition of the series in order to get their work out there. It feels sort of scummy when I think about it, and I know it sounds dumb, but it would sit way better with me if this was just a Silent Hill spin-off, or better yet, its own property. I guess, how would you feel if Capcom announced a reimagining of Resident Evil 1, but you played as an Umbrella employee? Only in this game, Umbrella is a bank, and you have to aggressively pursue litigation against Jill and Chris, who are delinquent on their loans. Okay, I'm gonna level with you for a second. I did write this section of the script before I played RE8's DLC campaign, Shadows of Rose, and hot damn, does this sound like a much better alternative. Okay, it looking better by comparison aside, I think we can all agree there is absolutely no need to attach any of that to Resident Evil. I guess I just wanted to get that off of my chest. Like I said before, this was a great story and I would love to see more work like it. I'm just left scratching my head at what the hell they were thinking pitching it as a Silent Hill game.
Can I see some ID? Over 21's only.
Sorry, mine was taken by a cop.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think we should start this one at the beginning, and that means with my absolute favorite console of all time, Nintendo's powerhouse of a market innovation matched in raw computing power only by this thing. Alright, jokes aside, there are without a doubt solid applications of the Wii's specific brand of motion controls, and if there was one thing outside of an on-rails shooter that taught me that lesson, it's Shattered Memories. Using the nunchuck to control Harry and the Wiimote to move his flashlight just feels natural as hell. The two control types are just perfectly in sync with each other, and after a bit you'll be walking around Silent Hill looking around and you'll stop noticing the Wiimote. Normally I'd be criticizing the hell out of the Wii right now, but these developers really knew how to leverage its strengths in a way that makes for a gameplay experience that's wholly unique to the platform, at least as far as exploration goes. We'll get into it, I promise. I will say though, the quote-unquote motion control puzzles do dip real far into the stereotypical Wii gimmick territory. I mean, yes, it's a little impressive seeing cans have quasi-realistic physics when you pick them up and drop them, but this kind of stuff adds nothing to the game and only serves to draw you out of the watertight atmosphere the developers so expertly set up here. And believe me, that is exactly what they did here. Walking around Silent Hill at night with the snow just drifting through your flashlight's little illuminated cone is so damn convincing, you start to get a little cold after a while. This is a wonderfully realized game world, and it's one that plays to a very specific part of my brain. For some reason, I truly can't say why, I've always just preferred these convincingly realistic and contemporary settings for video games. I mean, sure, a zombie-infested colony on another planet, or an island transported back in time and crawling with velociraptors are great, but for me, something recognizable and familiar is always going to have a bigger impact. Shattered Memories' version of Silent Hill does an amazing job at representing small-town America and all of its little idiosyncrasies. In fact, they do such a good job at it that I sort of wish the entire game was just the parts where you're walking around, taking in the scenery, and trying to solve the odd puzzle. I say that for two reasons. Like I mentioned before, they did a killer job representing what a town like this would really look like, but also because the other component of this game is absolute dog shit. In some kind of a weird move towards unique design that I'm not sure was genuine inspiration or some artsy nerds saying, but what if video games weren't fun, SM strips you of any kind of offensive measures when you come across enemies. Instead of any semblance of combat here, you'll just need to get the hell out of Dodge, and this is where several really bad factors overlap to form some kind of perfect storm of bad game design. First off, you've got the dumbness of it all. Throughout the entire game, you're only ever going to come across one type of enemy, and you will only ever encounter them at set points in the story, which isn't really terrible. I mean, plenty of games have scripted encounters, but since they play no role in any other part of the game, it feels like this abrupt change to something totally different when they show up. I've got tons of issues with these segments, but the most egregious is the fact that you're required to use a Wiimote to steer Harry while he's in a dead run. And while the motion controls do feel great skulking around an abandoned town in the middle of a snowstorm, they're not quite so good at making hairpin turns and sprinting across what amounts to be an icy hedge maze. On top of the motion controls being, well, let's be charitable here, not very well tuned for this type of gameplay, you're forced to do these waggle actions when the enemies grab you, and I just never felt like these worked properly. The whole point of these sections is to have you run full speed through this maze that has a lot of potential routes, but all except one ends up sneaking back in on themselves. Basically, the devs want you picking the wrong way a few times till you eventually choose the right one through process of elimination. Something that might be infinitely easier if every single square inch of these areas weren't the exact same color and design. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I found that getting through one of these sections had more to do with luck of the draw than it did my ability to recognize slight differences in similar shades of ice blue. And if you've recently suffered a lobotomy and that sounds like fun, you can go ahead and throw in a constantly and wildly fluctuating frame rate. Listen, I know I've been staying on this subject for a while, but trust me when I say this would be a much, much better game without these chase sequences. They aren't very fun, and even if they were, there's a lot of technical issues you're going to have to maneuver around before you get to that theoretical fun experience. Getting back to the plus side though, the game's got this cool little feature where it tracks the stuff you look at and the answers you give in the therapist sections in order to slightly alter the game in some ways. Depending on your outlook, it's not exactly going to radically alter the story or anything, but you can change what events you get to see, how some characters act in those scenes, what color shirts they're wearing, and how the bad guys look. More importantly though, you can alter what kind of a person Harry is and how his daughter perceives him. I won't give anything away, but I will say it doesn't really matter who Harry is in the end because the game's ending remains exactly the same. I know I'm being a little greedy, but it would have been nice if we had more control over how things end up. Getting back to the frame rate, Shattered Memories does target 60 FPS, which is always nice, but it can slow down often, and when it does, you will feel it. Sometimes it'll happen during moments where it makes sense, like graphically intensive exterior scenes with a lot of view distance, but sometimes it'll be during a cutscene taking place in a car. Like I said, this can really screw up the already awful chase scenes, but admittedly it doesn't have much of a negative effect on the act of walking around Silent Hill and searching for clues. What is really annoying though is how the frame rate drops to 0 during door transitions. I know this is a loading thing, but it feels gross in motion. In all honesty, you have no idea how long it took me to record that part because I kept saying Groshin in motion. Easy, 4 or 5 times in a row. When it's all said and done, Shattered Memories is not, and I repeat, is not a Silent Hill game, but it is a really good game. The exploration and general bumming around the town of Silent Hill is really immersive, and I can't stress enough how good the story is. When you play the Wii version, you're going to have to deal with motion controls that can run the wide gamut from very well made down to incredibly frustrating, but I would argue it's worth weathering the crappy chase scenes so you can experience the world's seminal flashlight holding simulator. There are, however, 2 other ways you can play this game, so let's figure out how they fared with nary a motion control to speak of.
Daddy? Daddy?
Sweetie, you're okay? Are you at home? Sweetie, wait there.
About a year after Shattered Memories dropped on the Wii, we got 2 ports to other consoles, and I think it'd be best to start off with the most interesting. SHSM on the PSP targets 60 frames per second and operates at the obvious resolution of 480 by 272. Since it lacks any motion controls, or a second analog stick for that matter, this version of the game relegates both forward movement and the flashlight controls to the PSP's little analog nub, and I'd say the scheme works pretty damn well. During sections that require motion controls like puzzles or interactive stuff, you'll move a cursor around instead, but since these parts didn't really add much to the game in my opinion, I don't really mind the change here. I will admit, it is a shame losing the feeling of directly controlling Harry's flashlight, but I think the general novelty of playing this game on a PSP makes up for a lot of that. And speaking of which, check out how damn good this game looks. At first glance, I thought it was a 1-to-1 copy of the original Wii release. Taking a closer look, we can see that geometry is a bit less complex, which you might not even notice on the PSP screen anyways, and the static filter is much lower res, making it obscure more of the screen, which is a shame. There are missing details in the environment as well, but that's not exactly something a regular person not making a video on port differences would even notice. Something that person might notice though is the fact that the frame rate is even more inconsistent than the Wii version. While this port does target 60 frames per second, it struggles to hit that in the best of times. Like I mentioned before though, during the exploratory parts of the game, this never really gets in the way. Thanks to the lower resolution of this port, we do get a lot of aliasing here, but to be honest, I really like it. The clean edges gives off an incredibly sharp look, and being a fan of upscaled 240p video anyways, I'm never really deterred by visible stair-stepping in retro games. The chase sequences are a percentage point more annoying thanks to a less reliable frame rate here on PSP, but on the plus side, all that's required to get these things off of you is a simple button press, so I guess we'll call this one a draw. As you would likely expect, there were some cuts that needed to be made to even get this game running on such a low-power piece of hardware, but I would say it was definitely worth it. Seeing this game running on an original PSP screen is really a sight to behold, plus the atmosphere, story, and overall visual design has remained untouched. This is without a doubt an amazing way to play Shattered Memories, but it's not your only option, so let's go ahead and check out what's going on with the PSP's older, more successful brother.
That was elegant.
Lacking in finesse, but 10 for effort.
On the PS2, Shattered Memories is a pretty interesting little package. First off, it's rocking the same 60 frame per second target the other 2 ports aimed for, but we see a drop down to 480i compared to the Wii original's 480p. And without a doubt, the difference in sharpness is very noticeable. To make up for that though, this seems to be the better performing port in some scenarios, and there is a very good reason for that. If you take a look at the Wii and PS2 back to back, you'll see not only is the draw distance way less far out on PS2, but this port's also lacking background assets, which is really odd because they weren't even this aggressive with the PSP port. You really gotta wonder what exactly happened during the porting process where the PS2 version needed more trimming than the portable title in order to run well. That's a little strange to say the least. The static filter also has a sharper, more visible look to it in this version, and it obscures more of the screen with gray. On the Wii, it's more of a subtle effect that you have to look really hard to see, but on PS2, it's full-on TV static and it definitely doesn't look as good. I also noticed what looks like Z-fighting around animated areas of the face in this version, causing these black lines to be visible when someone's talking. Which, to be honest, depending on whether or not you're upscaling this game and what kind of display you're using, you may not even notice. Other than that though, the game plays just like it does on PSP, only now you're able to control Harry's movement with the left analog stick and his flashlight with the right. An obvious and expected improvement. And really, there's not much else to say about this port. It took what seems to be considerably more work to get running than the PSP version did, which is very interesting, and in that process, a lot of elements had to either be replaced or toned down. I'll be honest, this wasn't exactly what I was expecting. It is, however, a lot more interesting, so let's stack all the ports together and figure out which one's gonna work best for you.
I'm not gonna sit here and have you screw around with me. I don't need the hassle.
I feel like I've said this about 1,000 times in this video already, but this one is a particularly tough one. Each one of Shattered Memories' releases offers something that might appeal to someone who's watching this right now. The Wii version, while using a lot of that stereotypical waggle stuff we all got tired of a week after the console's launch, also uses the motion controls in really interesting ways that makes the game a little more immersive. The PSP port, alongside it being a miracle it works at all, is surprisingly good looking, and you really can't discount how cool it is to have a full modern console release that you can play on the go. Or I guess modern as far as this game's release date is concerned, you know what I mean. The PS2 version, while heavily cut down visually speaking, does run at a more consistent frame rate than the other two, and given how bad performance can be in this game, you wouldn't exactly be crazy for wanting that. I can't really say which one of these is going to be the objective best way to experience Shattered Memories because honestly, all three have some pretty solid selling points. Personally, I am no fan of motion controls and I avoid them whenever possible, but even I can admit moving that flashlight around to illuminate the abandoned town of Silent Hill feels really damn cool. As a hardware nerd, just the thought that I'm playing this game on PSP is enough to warrant a playthrough there, and while the PS2 is the most bland port in some ways, it also offers the best gameplay if you're sensitive to frame rate fluctuations. In the end, it's all up to you which one sounds best, but the only important factor is you pick one of them. Shattered Memories, like I've said a few times by now, is in no way, shape, or form a Silent Hill title, but it is a really emotionally engaging story and a very interesting take on the mystery/psychological horror genre. If you're a little biased towards the original Silent Hill and you don't like the idea of someone reimagining it, I totally get that. But honestly, it's incredibly easy to just play this game and think of it as its own thing. After all, it's just the names that are used here. You could easily forget it has anything to do with Silent Hill and just enjoy it for what it is. A statement that is going to become much harder to say as we move forward with these non-Team Silent releases. Silent Hill Homecoming was the very first instance of Konami trying to bring the series into the next generation of console hardware. I mean, sure, we had titles released during the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, but they were on lower-end, less powerful hardware like the PSP and Wii. And while I can totally understand for fans and developers alike to want to move this series forward into the HD age, looking back with 2020 hindsight, that was probably the worst idea ever. A lot of you guys were there, and I'm sure you'll remember, but at the time of the 360 and PS3 supremacy, awful frame rates and sub-720p video weren't just the norm, they were just about the only option. It was an awful era of trash performance, screen tearing, and a graphics over gameplay mentality. And so, to give the devil his due, I would imagine a lot of the stuff most people don't like about Homecoming stems not just from this game's specific development, but the overall concept of developing games in this era. And that goes for the gameplay as well. The prevailing idea was that a slow-paced survival horror game just couldn't work at that point, so the only answer was to turn Silent Hill into a third-person action game, complete with dodge rolls, dialogue options, quick-time events, over-the-shoulder shooting, and 4-hit combos. Hell, you add crafting and stealth kills in there, and you've got yourself a complete list of 2007-era game design mechanics. So yes, Homecoming is a very different game compared to the other entries in the series as far as design, format, and overall visuals are concerned, and the elements that did happen to make it through the modern gaming filter were often misinterpreted by the development team. Truth be told, just like Shattered Memories, this is a sorry excuse for a Silent Hill game. The kind of stuff you might be expecting as a fan of the series just flat out isn't coming while playing this, but that's not to say it's a bad video game overall. Okay, so without a doubt, it does have some noticeable issues, but in the grand scheme of things, it is a fairly functional, fun action horror title once you start mentally divorcing it from the games it's claiming to be related to. And I know that might be a tall order for some, but let's say hypothetically you are planning on giving Homecoming a shot, you might be wondering, which one of its 3 ports should you go for? Starting off for the PS3 version, we've got a native 720p image with a 30 frame per second target, and I can assure you that is a target it almost never hits. This game genuinely chugs. You'll be dropping frames in almost every scenario, including combat, which can lead to the odd instance of you getting your ass kicked through no fault of your own. And the real travesty is it doesn't look particularly great, or at least not so good that it explains all the slowdown. It isn't a terrible looking game, and it certainly wasn't when it released, but I feel like its presentation has aged far less gracefully than the PS2 games. If I'm being generous though, there are some elements here that look pretty damn good. In dark areas, it has great black levels and a nice contrasty look. Sadly though, those black levels are turned gray most of the time thanks to the static filter. God, here's hoping nobody was playing a drinking game where they take a sip every time I mention a static filter being ugly in a Silent Hill game, because they've got alcohol poisoning by now. And if you know me, you know I am not a fan of these big, bright, colorful button cues on screen. They aren't my cup of tea at the best of times, but in a tense horror game like Silent Hill, they are particularly frustrating. When attacking enemies with appropriate weapons, little damage indicators can show up on them, and while I normally think this is a good idea in theory, in Homecoming they just look sort of fake and plasticky, like they're stuck on. On the plus side though, killing these bugs shows some very cool physics as the pieces of their little bug bodies scatter believably across the floor. And speaking of which, environmental objects are also given semi-realistic physics, which, if I'm being honest, is very cool. Not exactly something I would expect to see in a Silent Hill game, but cool nonetheless. Hilariously, the mouths in this game give off a very strange look when they animate, kind of like they were modeled by someone who just barely understood how actual mouths look. I really don't know what's going on here, but maybe it has to do with the character's teeth. Everyone seems to have double the amount they're supposed to, and Ellie over here looks like she got plastic surgery to ensure she's always doing 2010 era duck face. Moving away from the presentation though, Homecoming switched its perspective to a more over-the-shoulder third-person deal, and with that comes the expected drop of tank controls. And I guess it works well enough for what it is. I mean, it's nothing special, but I wouldn't exactly say there's any issues with how Alex controls either. That being said, call me crazy, but I don't think this is something I should be doing in a Silent Hill game. Like, I know there's no rational reason for not wanting this to be going on in a horror game, but doesn't this just feel wrong to you?
Damn it!
Combat works in what I would call an expected way for the era. When using melee weapons, holding a shoulder button will ready an attack, and you have quick and heavy varieties. And since this is no longer a psychological horror franchise, combining the two can lead to a spinning knife attack or finishers if your opponent is staggered. When you're fighting, you can hit the dodge roll button, which is supposed to slip enemy attacks, but I never really got it to work consistently. I would dodge at what feels like just the right time as the attack was coming in and still get hit by it, but then for the next one, use the same exact approach and it would just work that time. Believe me, I'm always willing to admit when the fault might be mine for sucking, but this feels like a mechanic that just needed a little more time in the oven. And possibly one of the reasons for that is things just feel very slow in this game. I couldn't tell you if it was the frame rate or some sort of input lag on the game's end, but it just sort of felt like actions were taking place a good long while after my button presses. Shooting now takes place the same way it does in a typical third-person game, with an over-the-shoulder view and an on-screen reticle, which I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but this just does not look right in an SH game. And speaking of which, Homecoming has dialogue options, and that's strange enough for this series, but what really baffles me is that they're completely arbitrary. There's only one, and I really mean that, just a single response that will move the conversation forward, with the rest just resulting in a single word response.
Hey, you're Curtis, right?
And once you figure this out, you can peer right through the video game and actually see the developers struggling to include shallow modern gaming tropes to try and grab a wider audience. All in all, I wouldn't necessarily say that Homecoming is a terrible gameplay experience. I mean, it's relatively functional, and aside from the performance issues, there's definitely a foundation here. It's a good enough video game on its own, although maybe a little undercooked, but it just isn't Silent Hill. And believe me, I understand what you're probably thinking. Game series do have to change or adapt over time, but I feel like those changes should be more gradual and maybe based on what the fan base wants, as opposed to people who were never going to play this thing in the first place. Completely upending everything a fan has come to expect from a Silent Hill game is not a good way to get them to play a new release, and people who aren't fans of Silent Hill aren't going out in droves to buy games based on its title, no matter how many dodge rolls or dialogue options are included. So in the end, you've alienated your core fans and offered new ones an experience that can arguably be had better elsewhere. Not exactly what I would call a great business move. I know I've already said this about Origins, but had Homecoming have been released under a different title and sold as a game inspired by Silent Hill, a majority of the people watching this right now would likely have remembered it way more fondly. Regardless of how it was remembered though, we are here to look at how it plays across all platforms, so let's have a look at how Homecoming runs on an Xbox.
Good luck, soldier.
Thanks.
Silent Hill Homecoming on the Series X is certainly an improvement over its PS3 counterpart, with it upscaling all the way to 4K, but I would say it's lacking the one feature I was really looking for, a boost to 60 frames per second. I mean, I'm not about to look a gift horse in the mouth, but it wasn't exactly the game's visuals I had a problem with, and the real kicker is it has just as hard of a time hitting that 30 FPS ceiling as the PS3 version did. So you're really not getting any better of a gameplay experience here, but I won't lie, having a nice 4K image to look at does help soften that blow a bit. Sadly, the game's static filter didn't get any kind of improvements done to it, so its sort of soft look at 720p is only worsened with that tripled vertical resolution. I did, however, expectedly enjoy the much sharper image at 4K, and specifically I really liked how edges and text fared. I just wish some of the 2D assets got a little extra attention because they can be a little blurry at the higher scale. I also found this version to be significantly darker than the other console port we looked at, even when set to max brightness in the menu. I'm not really sure if this is also the case for the 360 release or if it's something specific to the Series X, but either way I wouldn't necessarily say it's a problem, just kind of something worth mentioning. Other than that though, you can expect the same exact Silent Hill Homecoming experience you got on either the 360 or PS3, just with a bump up in operating resolution. If you plan on playing this game on console anyways, I'd say you might as well take advantage of the better looking option, but if you can't get a hold of a current gen Xbox, don't worry about missing out on anything substantial. And up last, we have Homecoming's PC port, and what I would call simultaneously its best and worst showing. A fresh install of Silent Hill Homecoming has major issues running at anything above 1080p, and for some ridiculous reason only supports 30 frames per second. Add that to a serious problem with frequent random crashes, and this version really isn't worth checking out over something like the Series X release. But like any PC port, where the developers fail, the community will succeed. Only with this one, it took a little more effort than I would normally like to get it running right. As usual, this process had me visiting the PC Gaming Wiki for a few fixes, and they do list a few that solved my issues, primarily the 1080p ceiling. Sadly though, I couldn't seem to get 60 frames per second working. I tried a few possible solutions, but they didn't do anything for me, and one of them kept getting flagged as a Trojan by Windows. Now, if you've done this stuff before, you'll know that Windows does not really like the kind of user-made programs that allow games to run better, but this one was flagged as a very specific Trojan, and while I do trust the kind of people who make this stuff overall, maybe I don't trust the type of no-name sites that host them quite as much. So I spent a little bit of time on Google looking for alternative fixes and managed to find one that worked perfectly. And to save you guys the headache, I'll link that along with the other patches we've talked about so far in a pinned comment. And with that, we've got a port of Homecoming that hits 4K at 60 frames per second, and that is about as nice as you would think. I mean, immediately the game feels way more responsive and less sludgy to control. There is still the odd crash here or there, so make sure you save often, and if you're planning on playing with a USB controller, keep in mind that you have to enable that through the menu instead of the wacky idea of all that happening automatically. But even when you do that, you're going to have to deal with generic button labels. You can definitely find a fix for this, but by this point in the process, I just did not care anymore. The good news is you definitely can get acclimated to the numeric button cues, or at least I did, so if you end up being as lazy as me, you won't exactly have to worry. Now, if I were you, I wouldn't get any funny ideas that this is going to act like a magic bullet for fixing the game's issues, because it is still a very buggy mess, but when it comes to playing this thing, on PC and modded is the absolute best possible scenario you could hope for. And even saying that, it's not exactly as perfect as that sounds. I noticed what seemed to be micro stutters all over the place, and after going back and taking a look, that's exactly what was going down. I didn't find any crazy dips in frame rate, but in certain areas, despite the fact that I'm running Homecoming on a machine that should be able to handle 30 simultaneous instances of it, I did see little 3 or 4 frame drops and sometimes as much as 10. Now, this certainly is not what I would call a gameplay ruining problem, but it does make the game feel less smooth, and trust me, with all of its issues, Homecoming doesn't need any more downsides.
You gotta be shitting me!
If you've ever watched my previous videos on the series, you will have likely noticed that there is no love lost between me and the Western-produced Silent Hill games, but that being said, I don't hate Homecoming. I think it has an interesting feel and a story that, while a little derivative of SH2, is kind of cool. Personally, I would have enjoyed all of this way more in the context of a new IP inspired by Silent Hill as opposed to an attempt at being Silent Hill, but sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. This might be an incredibly choppy, buggy, and overall unpolished gameplay experience, but I would still say it's worth checking out. And if you decide to take me up on that recommendation, there are a few go-tos in terms of ways to play it. The series export, while running at an amazingly unsteady 30 frames per second, does offer 4K out of the box, and if you're planning on going after a console playthrough, this probably should be your first stop. Now keep in mind, this isn't native 4K, but instead an image resulting in upscaling after the fact, but you really gotta take what you can get when this particular console generation is concerned. There's been no improvements or tweaks to make better use of the platform's resources, so don't expect any extra work to have gone into this, but it is the console Homecoming experience, only slightly nicer looking. If you're looking to play the game at 60 frames per second, the good news is you're not going to have to spend too much time deciding on which way you want to go, because there's really only one direction to head in. On PC, Homecoming has the potential to play and look significantly better than it would on console, but be prepared to put in a little extra effort to get it going that way. I'd say if you're not looking to mod it, the 1080p 30fps cap and confusing numeric-based button prompts make it one of the less appealing options, but for some it has the potential to be the cheapest, so I guess go where your heart and your wallet lead you on that one. No matter which one you end up going with, you're getting a less than ideal experience gameplay-wise, but some good atmosphere and a story that can be kind of interesting certainly makes up for that in my mind. But hey, there's always the bonus of Pyramid Head showing up outside of James Sunderland's personal inner torment, so at the very least you can count on canon-breaking fan service, which, you know, that's nice.
Listen, if there's a quick way out of here, I'd really appreciate if you just tell me.
Way out? What good would that do?
Okay, so me and Silent Hill Downpour have a bit of a history. When this game was first announced, a hardcore Silent Hill fan could be forgiven for not even being aware it existed. News about it came in the form of a big push for the series that saw 3 SH games and a movie getting press all at once. Now, I wonder why that sounds so familiar. Yeah, for those of you who haven't gone through this before, I would say don't go holding your breath for an SH revival anytime soon. Of course, I could be wrong, and I hope that I am, but I'm probably not. Anyways, Downpour is definitely known for a lot, but I think its most infamous trait is that it abandoned most of the gameplay and formatting conventions that the series had been known for up until about Silent Hill 3. It took the form of a more open world sort of game. It had side quests and a fast travel system that could be unlocked. For someone like me, this news was like a direct message from Konami saying SH fans just aren't welcome here anymore. So I heeded that warning and I let Downpour sit in the bargain bin for years. And I do mean years. It was round about 2021 when I first played it for myself, and I only really picked it up because I was working on my Silent Hill retrospective. In the meantime, I had heard about its issues, but nevertheless, I came in attempting to have what resembled an open mind. I knew it likely wouldn't be the SH game I had long been waiting for, but at the very least, it might be a fun way to pass some time, and it turned out to be not that. Silent Hill Downpour suffers from a lot of issues. Not only does it play fast and loose with core Silent Hill concepts, but it makes this weird attempt at turning side characters from the awful comic run into canon movers and shakers in the overall lore of the series. I mean, listen, I'm okay enough with people adding stuff into the present workings of the town in the game they're working on, but I don't think a totally different developer should be going in and adding history that predates the original writer's work, but that's just me. In a more general sense, Downpour's story takes a shot at having changeable elements that could alter not only how it ends, but how it started. Its main character, Murphy Pendleton, could either be the most unlucky man in the world or a hardened killer depending on how you play. And honestly, that's cool enough, I guess. I mean, I don't necessarily like it for this series, but in a vacuum, it's not the worst thing to come across in a game's story. But to put things lightly, Downpour's developers weren't exactly the best men for this job. In one of the most odd mistakes I've ever seen in a AAA product, some contradictory scenes play out regardless of what story path you're on, so you might be barreling towards a Murphy is the nicest guy on earth type of ending, but come across a scene where characters start listing things that he would have done in the Murphy is a psycho killer path. One big example of this is a conversation with the nun character where it's stated that Murphy is a victim of his own terrible deeds and needs to atone for them, even if you're on the path where it was previously revealed that Murphy had never done any of that stuff. And even if that doesn't matter too much to you, you're still going to run into the fact that core themes set up at the start of the game have a tendency to be outright contradicted by the choose-your-own-adventure nature of the story. Something you saw in a cutscene at the start of the game might be contradicted by a scene later on, and depending on how you play, you might be left scratching your head as to who the main character of the damn game was. It's honestly a giant mess, and it reeks of the kind of mistakes that get made when a plan ends up being a little too big and complicated for the people enacting it. But hey, this is a video game, right? I'm sure some of you would argue that the gameplay is far more important than the less interactive elements, and in that case, Downpour is even more of a raging trash fire. Truly, there are far too many issues here to list in this video, and if you look down at the amount of time that has passed already, that's gonna say a lot, but let's do a Cliff Notes version of the most important ones. Since we've got no inventory system for equipables, Murphy can only hold a single melee weapon and a gun in a holster, so whatever's in your hand at the moment will get thrown out when you pick something new up. So I want you to imagine this incredibly fun situation. Let's say you have a melee weapon equipped and you see a gun. You're going to have to pick up the gun, which will drop the melee weapon. Then you're going to have to pick up the melee weapon, which will holster the gun. This is an absolute nightmare, and you'd be surprised how often it happens. There's also way too many competing functions mapped to way too many different buttons. For example, you can hit a button to take your flashlight off of your shirt and hold it in your hand, which makes no sense because it doesn't work any differently. I truly mean it when I say there is no reason to ever do this. But hey, there's also a completely different button dedicated to pulling out your lighter, despite the fact that when you don't have a flashlight, the pull out your flashlight button, which is totally separate, pulls out your lighter anyways. And I know those sound like very tiny nitpicks, but they're just a few examples of how this game will map the same exact function to multiple buttons when 15 minutes of critical thinking would have eliminated half of these assignments. On top of that, Downpour continues the asinine trend of breakable weapons in an SH game, so have fun seeing this happen in the middle of every second fight you get into. But hey, on the plus side, if you're engaged in combat in this game, having a weapon break is going to be the least of your problems. Downpour most definitely wants the players engaged during a fight, and to these developers that meant attacking a few times until the enemy blocks, and then blocking their attacks, then attacking a few times and repeating that cycle for what seems like an eternity. And if you don't believe me, here's a regular old fight with a very early game enemy. But don't you go thinking that means this is an easy game. Bad guys can break through your attack animations anytime they want, and they have such hard to read tells that you're going to be taking near constant damage if you're fighting. Sometimes they're going to react to you with a 2-hit string, and sometimes it's more than 5 hits. And if you think you can reliably stop blocking and get a hit on reaction, well, I invite you to try. I am being dead serious when I say that this is the least satisfying and most frustrating combat I have ever come across in any video game, period. And believe me when I say that there is a near infinite list of issues I haven't talked about yet, but this isn't exactly the venue for that, so why don't we jump into how Downpour looks and runs on the PS3. Spoiler warning, it is not great.
All yours now, sugar.
Let's get this done.
Silent Hill Downpour has a very familiar spec sheet as far as PS3 games go. It operates at 720p no matter what you set your console to output, and it targets 30 frames per second. And in a situation where you're limited to 30 FPS, the hope is that a concession like that was made in order to support a presentation that is impressive in some way, but believe you me, that is not the case here. Even at the time, this was a very bad-looking video game. The color palette is incredibly washed out, which does not blend well with the overly dark picture, and turning the brightness up only manages to take that really dark picture and make it a really smoky, dark gray. Speaking of which, this game has some of the most smeary, foggy-looking 3D graphics I have ever seen in my entire life. It is very hard to make out details anywhere on screen, and I'm not joking when I say that this thing is visually fatiguing to look at for long periods of time. It really does feel like someone has smeared my display with Vaseline, and maybe you could argue those comments are more personal taste, but what is objectively bad is the absolutely embarrassing average frame rate here. This thing runs like hot garbage, with frame rate drops into the mid-teens. Just watching two people talk to each other in a cutscene, it's going to hit slideshow territory, but during gameplay, the fluctuations are so constant, calling it a 30 FPS game is sort of lying. Realistically, it's more like 22 to 25 frames per second most of the time, and if you thought the reaction-based combat sounded frustrating before, well, try engaging in it when the amount of time you have to react to attacks is constantly in flux. And even if you are cool with a horrible frame rate, there is no way you enjoy constant screen tearing. I mean, just look at this. And it's not like I'm showing you some crazy detailed area with all kinds of overlapping effects. Essentially, every single screen in the game looks like this. I can pretty much guarantee you, if you are moving the camera in Downpour, you're also looking at screen tearing. Now, for those of you who don't know, disabling VSync in scenes that require a lot of processing power is no rare occurrence during this game's era. It happened all over the place, including both PS3 and 360 ports of RE5. Where Downpour differs, however, is that VSync never seems to be on in the first place. There's no part of the game where screen tearing doesn't take place, including cutscenes and menus. And call me crazy, but facial animations and overall expressiveness in Silent Hill 3 seems to mop the floor with this game. I mean, it's not even a close fight. Okay, so take the muddy, smeared graphics, the dark picture, low frame rate, and screen tearing, and you've got yourself the video equivalent of glaucoma. It's genuinely a hard game to play for long periods. And if you're cool with your eyes being assaulted, let me assure you, your ears aren't going to be treated any better. Instead of having series composer Akira Yamaoka score Downpour, they went with licensed material for the most part, and while everyone's taste is definitely going to differ, I can say with confidence, in my opinion, this was a bad move. These licensed tracks don't fit the game very well, and I feel like even the worst tracks from Yamaoka would have served it better. I can, however, applaud some of the more ambient soundscapes found here. These tracks feel very horror movie in tone, and they do a good job of keeping the tension up even when you're not doing or looking at anything too scary. There's no two ways about it, this was a very bad showing. I mean, the PS3 isn't exactly known for performing well, but this is just rough. So let's go ahead and jump over to the Series X and pray to God there's better news to be had there. And I'm happy to say there actually is. This port of Downpour internally upscales a 1080p image to 4K, and holy hell is it a massive improvement. Back when I first reviewed this game, and even now getting new footage captured, one of my biggest problems was how blurry and smeared the video output is. Even when I was viewing it on a 1080p screen, the PS3 version's 720p was just really tough to look at. Thanks to the rotten performance and blurry look, I found the game to be very visually fatiguing. Like, I genuinely couldn't play it for more than an hour or two before my eyes got tired of looking at it and trying to resolve any detail. Here on Series X, it is a much more clear image, and it's not just the higher resolution. I can't say what it is, but this is just an easier picture to look at. And while that was really nice, I was even more blown away when I noticed how much better the game performs. Now, it is still a 30 FPS game, which is a disappointment, but the difference between a relatively stable 30 FPS frame rate and a wildly varying one is night and day. I'm not really sure if the actual 360 version shares this improved performance, but there is at least one sign pointing towards that being the case. This backwards compatible title does not support FPS boost, which to my mind means the game was never tweaked to take advantage of this better console's vastly superior resources. So maybe what we're getting here is how the game would normally perform on an Xbox 360. I could be wrong about that, but either way, we've got ourselves a version of Downpour that plays pretty damn okay. The game's not exactly 100% locked at 30, but by comparison, this may as well be the most solid frame rate ever seen by human eyes. And I'm being dead serious when I say just these two improvements make this an entirely different game. It really blew my mind how much more playable Downpour became when I didn't have to fight the game tooth and nail for every inch of progress. Now, it is very important to give credit where credit is due and really appreciate how much better of an experience this is, but it is still Downpour.
Shut the hell up!
I mean, even with a great looking picture and much improved frame rate, you're still going to encounter sloppy as hell combat mechanics, annoyingly fragile melee weapons, what is in my opinion a failed attempt at an open world design, and a story that contradicts itself at nearly every turn. All that being said though, it is much easier to forgive those things when I can actually play the game. I really mean it when I say that out of every port we've covered so far in this video, this release right here makes the most drastic improvement over the base game. In my mind, it's not enough to make it a better Silent Hill game, but I'll be damned if it's not a vastly superior video game anyways. That being said, there's a pretty big downside to consider here. One that might not be a big deal for some, and for others may be the straw that broke the camel's back. Unlike both Homecoming and the SHHD collection, Downpour for some reason is not available digitally on Xbox. It has a listing page, but you can't purchase it. So you're going to need to check eBay for a physical copy, and just like with any other game, the used market has lost its damn mind here. You're probably going to have to spend close to what Downpour costs brand new, and well, I don't think it's worth it. But if you just so happen to already have yourself a copy of the Xbox 360 version of Downpour somewhere in your house keeping a coffee table level, I'd say toss it in your Series X and see what a big difference it makes having it run above slideshow speeds. Well, I doubt very much this is going to surprise anyone, but there is essentially one version of Silent Hill Downpour as far as I'm concerned, and it's on the Xbox Series X. The PS3 version runs horribly and produces a picture just barely different from looking into a tub of industrial-strength lubricant. Like I've already said, Downpour on PS3 was fatiguing to play because you've got to spend all your time fighting against its crappy performance, and in a game that requires you to keep a constant eye on small details in the environment, it probably shouldn't have such a smeared looking picture. Now, I really can't say if the Xbox 360 version performs closer to the Series X or PS3, but since I've never touched it, from my perspective, the 360 disc doesn't belong anywhere outside of a Series X. And even if you do have both necessary parts of that equation, I'm not 100% sure it's worth starting up anyways. Silent Hill Downpour is the result of a mindset that assumes the only reason Silent Hill fans haven't bought any Silent Hill games recently is because of a lack of modern gaming features like breakable weapons and open world or dialogue options. As opposed to the more obvious answer, well, they just haven't had a real Silent Hill title to purchase for damn near 2 decades. But outside of that realm, Silent Hill Downpour has an interesting enough story and a game world that's actually kind of cool. Even when it's performing well, the combat can be god-awful, but I feel like there are plenty of games I played based solely on enjoying a single aspect of them, and I wouldn't want to deny you that same courtesy. So if you do plan on taking the plunge into Downpour's version of Silent Hill, without a doubt the Series X port should be your one and only option. Anything outside of that, and well, let's just say I wouldn't want to be in your shoes.
Guess today's a big day, huh? To tell you the truth, I'm sort of sorry to see you go.
Well guys, I would say we've all had about enough Silent Hill for the day. I hope this video served its intended purpose and has given some of you an idea of where you'd like to start in the series, and to those of you already well versed in SH lore, maybe a few interesting facts surrounding the many ports to be found in it. Oh, and by the way, I apologize for my long absence, but my mom came to visit me here in Tokyo, and I wanted to make that visit really special for her, so I didn't get any work done. After this video, I will go back to a quote-unquote normal release schedule, which, if I'm being honest, doesn't look a whole hell of a lot different from the last month, but hey, you can't rush perfection, and to a lesser degree, whatever the hell it is I put out. I hope you guys have had fun with what is to date the longest single video I've ever put out before, and I hope even more I see you all back for the next one. But until that day comes, thank you very much for watching. As usual, I'm Jared.
Forget it. This is way too gross.
And this is Avalanche Reviews. Well, hey there folks, thank you very much for watching whatever the hell it is I just made. If you're looking to support me and enable the craziness that has caused this specific project, I do have a Patreon, and there is always the YouTube membership program. If that doesn't work for you though, you could always like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, or maybe send me a DM with your address and we could set up one of those insurance scam things, which obviously I'm joking about. Or, you know, I mean, you could leave it. We could find out.